Chapter 1088. Feng Ming and Xie Zongyuan traversed thousands of miles and quickly arrived at the banks of the Tsang River. The two of them stopped and looked over. The waves were turbulent here and the river was more than 10 miles wide. Standing on the high ground, they could clearly see the layout of every camp on the other side. However, the Qinsang school disciples had come here several times to investigate. As long as they didn't cross the river, the demon cultivators didn't pay much attention. Xie Zongyuan looked back and said, "Vice-Chancellor Song is here too." Feng Ming said, "That's good. With one more person, we have a higher chance of success." Xie Zongyuan smiled and said, "In that case, not a single one of the disciples is left. Isn't Chancellor Feng afraid of unforeseen events?" Feng Ming said casually, "What unforeseen events can there be? Did Jinren Xie forget that other than our Qinsang cultivators, there are also the old demons from Yuyuan tribe? With their strength, they can protect the snake beheading cliff. It's just that Vice-Chancellor Song doesn't trust them." Xie Zongyuan said, "Those who are not of our tribe have different intentions. It's not wrong for Vice-Chancellor Song to think so." Feng Ming said, "Yuyuan tribe's current power is all thanks to our Qinsang school. We also put in a lot of effort to investigate earlier. Moreover, the elders and nephews of the tribe have all joined the Yaoyin clan. Jinren Wei is Jinren Zhang's disciple. Do we have to worry about him rebelling?" Xie Zongyuan thought about it and admitted, "That's true. With our Qinsang's power, we are far stronger than the Dark North tribe. It's impossible for them to join the Lord Yuan Palace." The two of them had just spoken a few words when a beam of light appeared in front of them. The light dissipated and Jinren Song appeared. Feng Ming smiled and said, "Vice-Chancellor Song, since you're here, you must agree with my decision." Jinren Song said solemnly, "Chancellor Feng, I will report your actions to the sect. I was unable to advise you in time. If the sect blames me, I will bear the responsibility with you too. However, since I'm here, I will first help you get rid of the enemy in front of us." Feng Ming laughed and said, "Then we'll talk about it after the battle." The three of them stopped talking. All of them gathered their powers, crossed the water and broke into the camp of the demon clan. They ignored the guards and went straight to the camp of the demon clan. Not long after, they arrived at the boundary. Feng Ming saw that there was a crude restriction array here and he didn't even think about it. With a flick of his hand, he tossed out a dozen lightning beads, instantly shattering the formation plate. At the same time, he took out his sword pellet and slashed in. On the other hand, Xie Zongyuan withdrew a copper pot and poured it down, causing a jade-white stream of water to gush out with a torrential momentum. Like a mountain torrent, it not only destroyed the entire tent. At the same time, he threw out dozens of array flags in all directions, sealing all the places that the water touched within. Once this formation was formed, for a short period of time, there was no need to worry about anyone barging in from the outside, and they could easily deal with their opponents. Just as Feng Ming expected, the demon cultivator in the tent did not expect that Qinsang school would choose this time to attack. An angry roar came from below, and astral winds surged in all directions. From the black wind and mist, an extremely sturdy man wearing a helmet and armor rushed out. He had a firm expression. His eyes shone brightly, and he had a thick beard that almost covered his chest. Feng Ming and the other two became spirited. They recognized this person as Demon King Fu Wan, the leader of Wudu tribe. He had already cultivated to the 4th transformation perfection realm, and if he was eliminated in one fell swoop, there was no need to fear the remaining demons. After Fu Wan rushed out of the tent in anger, he saw 3 nascent soul cultivators standing in the sky. He couldn't help but be startled. At this moment, he felt a sword light flash above him. He quickly lowered his head, but he heard a clanging sound. Although he dodged, half of his helmet and the bun on top of his head were cut off. His hair was disheveled and he was in a sorry state. The sword light was still unwilling to let him go. It spun in the air and attacked again. Fu Wan immediately took out a copper hammer and blocked it. With a clang, the sword light was knocked away, but a shallow sword mark was left on the surface of the hammer. He glanced to the side and saw that his house was surrounded by the formation flags. Looking at the situation, he knew that the other party wanted to kill him. He wanted to leave this place first, so he raised the sledgehammer in front of him and let the sword light cut his body several times. A series of sparks flew, but it couldn't break through his strong armor. He squatted down slightly and leaped into the air. Just now, Daoist Song had not made a move, but when he saw Fu Wan coming up, he took out his horsetail whisk and swept it. Strands of cloud silk floated down like cotton. Fu Wan did not care about them and wanted to use his sturdy armor to break out. However, when he came into contact with them, he found that he had fallen into a spider's web, and it was difficult for him to break free. Seeing more and more of them, he roared and tried to break free. However, at this moment, Xie Zongyuan pointed with both hands and a silver ball shot out. It was extremely fast and hit the bridge of Fu Wan's nose, causing blood to splatter. Fu Wan could not help but let out a muffled groan, and his body leaned back. However, his mana was slightly stabilized, and his injuries were immediately healed. However, it was only a short delay, and the cloud silk had already covered his entire body. He suddenly felt that his body was extremely heavy, as if he was carrying a small mountain on his back. He could not help but fall down, and was actually forced back to the ground. At this moment, the sword light attacked again, surrounding him and slashing randomly. Fu Wan had no choice but to use the hammer to block left and right. He only focused on protecting his head and ignored the attacks that landed on his body. However, because the cloud silk on his body was heavy, there were a few times when he wanted to soar into the sky, but he was hit back down. Even though he was strong, he could only defend at this moment. Although it was the first time that Feng Ming and the other two worked together, they had a tacit understanding. They knew that their opponent's skin was thick, and it would be difficult to kill him in an instant. Therefore, they first tried to restrict him to the ground, so they could calmly attack from the sky. Daoist Song saw that the situation had stabilized, and said, "Fellow Daoists, hold him back." He took out the sword from his waist and used his mana to guide it into the sky. However, he did not attack the enemy, but he kept absorbing the spiritual vigor from all directions. This was a famous magic weapon in the Purple Light Courtyard, called the Great Ceremony and Sorrow Sword. When it was used, light shone in all directions, but it still could not hurt people. It had to slowly accumulate spiritual vigor, and when its sharpness was at its peak, it was only a little bit weaker than a real weapon. Fu Wan looked at the sword light that was hanging high up in the sky. He could feel that the momentum was getting stronger and stronger. He could imagine how powerful the slash would be, and he could not help but feel a sense of danger. He knew that he had to find a way to stop it, so he took advantage of just now. He had already accumulated a lot of mana, so he took a deep breath and shouted. This shout was like the roar of a tiger or a dragon. Feng Ming and Xie Zongyuan suddenly felt that the spiritual vigor around them was in a mess, and the originally continuous attacks were suddenly messed up. Fu Wan took the opportunity. He shouted again, and his body instantly grew to a height of 10 feet. The cloud threads that entangled his body also broke off one by one. He raised the copper hammer in his hand and hit the sword that was hanging in the sky. Feng Ming saw this, and took out a flag. He held the long pole with one hand and shook it. In an instant, the ground shook, and even the water in the distance was stirred up. Fu Wan suddenly lost his balance, and his hammer naturally missed. Xie Zongyuan waved his sleeves and threw a talisman, which landed on Fu Wan's back. The latter felt like something was suppressing his body. In just a few breaths, his body continued to shrink, and he actually returned to his original appearance. Xie Zongyuan said, "Fellow Taoists, quickly attack. My sword light can only suppress him for half a minute." Feng Ming said loudly, "That's enough." The commotion here had already alarmed all the demon divisions. In less than half a minute, in just 100 breaths, the other 3 demon kings would come to help, so they had to kill him within this time. Daoist Song pointed at the sword that was hanging in the sky, and there was a flash of light. It slashed down. Fu Wan was shocked, and he raised the copper hammer in his hand to block. Who knew that the sword light was extremely sharp, and when it slashed down, there was a poochie sound. The sledgehammer was cut in half. Not only that, a small part of his body, along with an arm and a leg, was chopped off. The great demon let out a pained howl and fell into the turbulent waves. Under the joint attack of 3 great cultivators who had cultivated the Yuanying Dharma body, this famous demon king seemed to be unable to fight back. It wasn't that he was weak, but that he had too few magic treasures on him, and the methods that Feng Ming and the others used were all restraining him. He could only rely on his strong body and hard armor to bitterly resist. But if any one of the 3 were to fight against him, they definitely wouldn't be able to defeat him so easily. But even at this moment, the expressions of Feng Ming and the others didn't relax. This kind of injury would have killed a normal person, but the other party was a demon king. As long as his magic power wasn't exhausted, and no one paid attention to him, he would be able to regrow his limbs in a few breaths. So the 3 of them attacked at the same time, and the magic treasures and lightning beads attacked together, wanting to kill him in one fell swoop. Fu Wan's eyes became incomparably red. He knew that if he hesitated, he would die here. How could he be willing to give up? With a loud shout, he opened his mouth and spat out a cloud of black smoke. There seemed to be thin blood threads spiraling within it, and it actually stopped all the things that were attacking him. But after doing this, his originally full and sturdy body shriveled up a lot, and the divine light in his eyes dimmed a little. Xie Zongyuan recognized that this was a mouthful of magic power essence that Fu Wan had cultivated himself. Once he used it, his vitality would be greatly damaged, and his lifespan would be reduced. He could see that Fu Wan was already risking his life. Just as he was about to add more force, he heard a rumble, and the formation flags all shook. At the same time, the silvery white water that had soaked half of the flagpole also decreased a little. He was shocked, and said, "There's a demon king rushing over from outside. This formation can only last for a few dozen breaths at most. The 2 of you, quickly act." When Fu Wan heard this, it was as if he had seen a life-saving straw. He desperately activated his blood essence and magic power without caring about anything else. Feng Ming pondered for a while, then said, "I'll leave this to the 2 of you. I'll go meet the people outside." He turned around and went out of the formation. He saw a demon cultivator with long hair on his face, long arms, and short legs standing outside. This person only wore a green robe, and a long belt was tied around his waist, which was casually knotted. He held a wolf-tooth mace with both hands, and was constantly smashing the formation. Seeing him come out, he suddenly jumped back, and a white light shot out from his hand. Feng Ming didn't know what was going on, so he didn't dare to use his protective light to block it. He dodged, but at this moment, the demon cultivator jumped forward again, and actually jumped close to him. The wolf-tooth mace smashed down with a fierce wind. Feng Ming was about to dodge again, but he suddenly felt as if his body was being pulled by a strong wind, and he couldn't move. He knew that he had fallen into the trap of a strength path cultivator's magic power. Just now, the 3 of them were fighting with Fu Wan, and they had been trying to avoid such a situation. They didn't expect this opponent to be so cunning, and they fell into it when they weren't paying attention. However, he didn't panic. He waved the flag in his left hand, and the demon cultivator heard a loud sound next to his ears. He felt the world spin, and his mace naturally hit nothing. Feng Ming guided with his mind, and a sword light slashed out. The demon cultivator didn't have time to dodge, but he wasn't wearing armor, so his body was extremely nimble. He actually tilted his shoulder at the last moment, and only a small wound appeared, but it healed in the blink of an eye. While he was dodging, Feng Ming stretched out his hand again, and used a heaven and earth lock technique. This technique wasn't very useful against strength path cultivators, and they could escape with just a light struggle. However, the demon cultivator just now dodged the sword light, so he couldn't help but pause. In just a breath's time, Feng Ming waved his sleeve, and released a golden net, which covered the demon cultivator's head. The demon cultivator instantly felt that something was wrong, and he didn't dare to touch the net at all. He actually threw away the divine weapon in his hand, and then he curled his body into a ball, and suddenly turned into a wisp of white smoke. He wanted to crawl out of the hole in the large net. Feng Ming sneered, and the flag in his hand waved again. With a rumble, the surrounding scenery seemed to be turned upside down, and the demon cultivator immediately fell out of the white smoke. The golden net just happened to fall, and it trapped him firmly. Feng Ming took out a spell, and the net suddenly retracted. Where it came into contact with the demon cultivator's body, the sound of metal rubbing against metal could be heard, but the demon cultivator wasn't hurt at all, and he was still struggling inside. He was also secretly surprised, but the golden net was used by Elder Sun in the past, and he had once used it to strangle a demon king to death. He didn't expect that he couldn't take care of the demon cultivator in a short time. Just as he was about to use his magic power again, the demon cultivator spoke at this moment. "I'm Ape Tribe's Demon General Li Su. I know the rules of your Qinsang school, and if you kill me, how much merit do you get? But if you're willing to let me go, I'm willing to swear an oath to help you kill the other two." Feng Ming asked, "The other two?" The demonic cultivator sneered and said, "Since you're here, you must have already inquired about the situation in my camp. Why bother asking?" Then he closed his eyes and said, "Life or death, you can decide it with a word." Feng Ming made some calculations. Right now, among the tribes of Northern Dark, Ape Tribe was the strongest. This demon cultivator was rank 4 after all. He must know a lot of information, and he seemed to be tactful. It was useful to let him live. Inspiration surged beside him. Xie Zongyuan and Reverend Song came out. He turned around and asked, "How is it?" Xie Zongyuan said, "Fu Wan has already been beheaded." At this moment, the three of them seemed to have sensed something and looked up into the sky. They saw 2 more demonic cultivators coming from afar, but they realized that they seemed to have arrived a step too late, so they held their divine weapons and stood in the air with extremely vigilant expressions. They looked at the 3 of them from over 5 kilometers away and did not come over. Reverend Song saw that the 2 wanted to fight. He quickly said, "You 2 have already achieved your goal tonight. This expedition to Qinsang is also to temper your disciples. If we kill all the great demons, all the tribes will definitely scatter, and it will be even harder to kill them. Moreover, we have expended a lot of magic power. If we continue fighting, we will not be able to defend against any changes. It is better to stop while we're ahead." Feng Ming said, "Let's do as Vice Dean Song says." He lifted the demon cultivator in the net and rode astral winds, slowly retreating towards snake-slaying cliff with Song and Xie Zongyuan. Not long later, the 3 of them vanished into the night. Chapter 1089. On the second day, thousands of cultivators from Qinsang School, led by the top 10 disciples, crossed the Tsang River and charged into the camp of the demon clan. Although the demons had lost 2 demon kings, they were not at the end of the line. Moreover, there were still many demon clans coming from all directions, so they could still resist for a while. Because there was no cover on both sides of the Tsang River, the battle was extremely fierce. Thousands of escape lights chased each other back and forth on the river. But because the cultivators of Qinsang School had the starry flying palace to rely on, if their strength was not enough, they could retreat to the palace to cultivate at any time. In addition, their flying ability was far better than that of the demon clan, so they did not suffer many losses in the battle. Instead, it was the demon clan that suffered heavy casualties. The remaining 2 demon kings wanted to attack several times, but they were stopped by Feng Ming and the other 2, so they could only hold back. Qinsang School did not intend to finish the battle in one go. When it was dusk, they slowly retreated back to the snake beheading cliff. In the towering cloud tower, Yan Buxiao looked down and was very satisfied with the battle. In just one day, they killed at least hundreds of demon clan cultivators. It could be imagined that by the time they attacked the hinterland of Qinsang School, this number would be several times higher. Beside him stood a Taoist in a green robe. He looked at his expression and said discontentedly, "What do these small fries count for? How can senior brother be complacent because of this? I heard that spiritual master Feng and the other 2 killed 2 perfection stage demon kings yesterday. At this point, he said with a slightly regretful tone, it's a pity that senior martial brother couldn't follow them and missed a good opportunity to make a great contribution. Yan Buxiao had always been tolerant to his own people. This Taoist in a green robe was his clan brother, so his words were a little arrogant, but he did not mind. He laughed and said, I'm only at the first stage of the realm, far inferior to the 3 spiritual masters. If I went, I would only be a burden. Instead, I would cause the 3 of them to be unable to fight with their full strength. How can I make a contribution? The Taoist in a green robe retorted, Senior brother is wrong. You have a magic treasure bestowed by a Taoist master to protect you, and you also have the lofty cloud tower to protect you, so how could you be a burden? If Senior goes, it is likely that the remaining 2 demon kings will have difficulty escaping. With this merit, one of the hall chief positions in the Daylight Hall will belong to Senior in the future. Yan Buxiao said, that's a matter for the future. It's too early to say these things. The green-robed Taoist stared at him and said, how is it too early? This concerns Senior brother's future achievements, how can you not take it to heart? You must know that in order to deal with the great calamity, many of the rules of the past have been abolished. You can take advantage of this opportunity to soar into the sky. If there is a day that you are able to enter the main hall. Yan Buxiao smiled and waved his hand. All right. Let's not talk about this now. Which junior brother killed the most enemies? The green-robed Taoist had no choice but to stop the topic. He thought for a moment and said, if you want to talk about killing the most enemies, then you should be the one who killed the most. It isn't a peak head but someone from the bright god lineage. Yan Buxiao was a little surprised when he heard this, but then he showed a look of understanding. He said, I heard that a few days ago, Wang Zhenren brought his disciples to clear out Xianin Sky Palace and returned successfully. It isn't surprising that he has such a battle record. The green-robed Taoist was unconvinced. Currently, bright god lineage is slightly better. But when my disciples gain more experience, they won't be weaker than him. Yan Buxiao didn't mind. We are all disciples of the same sect, so why bother so much? The green-robed Taoist said eloquently, how can we not bother? Even if we are from the same sect, we should still see who is stronger and who is weaker. Yan Buxiao shook his head. He was the head of the top 10 disciples. No matter how many monster cultivators his disciples killed, he was also in charge. Why did he have to compete with the disciples of the bright god lineage? He wouldn't be offending them for no reason. However, although he didn't agree with some of the extreme words of this junior brother, he didn't want to destroy his morale. Thus, he didn't try to persuade him. For the next few days, the Qinsang cultivators and the monster division fought almost every day. However, the latter seemed to know that if they were chased away from the Tsang River, it would be even harder to resist. Without anything to rely on, it was even more difficult to resist. Thus, under the push of the remaining 2 monster kings, they stubbornly held on, unwilling to retreat even half a step. However, after all, they had suffered heavy casualties. If this continued, they would be defeated in a matter of days. On the 5th day, the situation changed. More than 100 flying boats landed in the midst of the demon clan, instantly stabilizing the demon clan that was on the verge of collapse. Yan Buxiao sensed that something was wrong and immediately invited Feng Ming and the other 2 to the lofty cloud tower to discuss countermeasures. First, he invited the 3 of them to sit down. He said, I heard the news that Python Division's chief, Luo Jiangyu, brought several elders and hundreds of tribesmen to help. When the 3 of them heard this, their expressions froze. Xie Zongyuan frowned. Is the news true? Yan Buxiao said, I have spies among the monster division and they didn't hide it on purpose. They even intentionally spread the news to stabilize the tribes and distract the people's morale. Spiritual Master Song said, I originally thought that after we attacked Kang, the 8 divisions would send people over. I didn't expect them to come so soon. Feng Ming's expression became serious. He said, that Luo Jiangyu isn't easy to deal with. Spiritual Master Yan, can you restrain your disciples and not come out for the next 2 days? Yan Buxiao said seriously, I also plan to do so. After several days of fierce fighting, my disciples have used up a lot of their mana and are tired. It's good to restrain them. But even if I don't go, others might come. Spiritual Master Song said, Spiritual Master Yan is right. The Python Division, the Bat Division, the Ape Division, and the Carp Division, these 4 monster divisions can be seen as 4 Qi Dao sects. They aren't the same as those vulgar monster cultivators from before. I want Spiritual Master Yan to set up restrictive formations in the next few days to guard against enemy attacks. I will send a letter to the sect to ask for reinforcements. This time, Feng Ming and Xie Zongyuan didn't object. The two of them had only cultivated Dharmakaya for a short period of time. Other than their talismans, they weren't familiar with many of the techniques in this realm. But Luo Jiangyu was different. He had reached this realm for at least hundreds of years, and now he was more than 1,000 years old. He thought that he had already died and reincarnated, but he was still alive. He must have used something to prolong his life. Moreover, this person was a Qi Dao cultivator, and he had a lot of knowledge. He wasn't someone that those monster kings who were confined to the northern underworld could compare to. Feng Ming said, I think that before the sect makes a decision, we might as well ask Spiritual Master Wei Zihong to come and help us. Xie Zongyuan thought for a while and said, that's possible. Spiritual Master Wei has a good relationship with the Yuyuan division. If he comes, he can at least make the monster division elder more obedient. The Yuyuan division's strength was actually not weak. Although they were nominally following the orders of the top 10 disciples, every time they went to battle, they weren't willing to use their full strength. Yan Buxiao also knew about this, but because he was close to the Zhaoyu division, unless it was necessary, he would never order them around. But if they could invite Wei Zihong here, not only would they have another third-stage realm cultivator, they would also be able to mobilize the Yuyuan division smoothly. Spiritual Master Song said, if Spiritual Master Yan has nothing else, we will go and make arrangements. Yan Buxiao stood up and cupped his hands, then I'll have to trouble the 3 spiritual masters. After Luo Jiangyu arrived at the camp, he had indeed thought of ambushing the snake beheading cliff. To return the favor to the Qinsang school, he saw that the cliff was heavily guarded and there were many restrictive arrays set up. He knew that there was no chance, so he gave up on the idea and focused on cleaning up the divisions. He specially set up dozens of flying boats on the river surface. This way, the moment the Qinsang cultivators came over, they would be able to sense it and wouldn't be unable to react like the previous time. At the same time, he set up array flags around the camp. It was no longer a place where people could enter and leave as they pleased. With this arrangement, the demon division's camp instantly became orderly, no longer as messy as before. 5 days passed like this. Luo Jiangyu had already gathered all the demon divisions together. According to what he thought, he only needed to do the same as the Qinsang school and continuously set up the restrictive arrays. If there were no changes, he would be able to confront them. The only thing that gave him a headache was that there were so many demon cultivators gathered in one place. Those with high cultivations could be easily dealt with. For those with slightly lower cultivations, they needed large amounts of blood and flesh. Just relying on the aquatic creatures in the Tsang River was far from enough. Just as he was thinking of a way to solve this problem, suddenly, the sky opposite him lit up. He heard the sound of water coming from above his head, and boundless light came from the south. He looked up and saw that it was a golden river that was thousands of miles long, wandering above the clouds. Finally, it made a winding turn and landed on the snake beheading cliff. After a whole minute, it disappeared. His eyes revealed a look of fear. He said with some disbelief, someone from the heavens abode. When he came back to his senses, he could no longer care about comforting the panicking demon divisions. He immediately wrote a letter and used his mana to send it to the demon court. Then, he sat down, his face full of disappointment. The Qinsang school had sent out the heavens abode, so the current situation was not something he could control. Everything he had done before was useless, and it could be said that he had wasted his efforts. LV Junyang stood on the tower, looking at the Tsang River, his white robe fluttering in the wind. Although he had just formed the heaven's abode, he had received many pointers from the books that Yan Changsheng had left behind. His whole body's aura was extremely well hidden, not a single bit leaked out. When Yan Buxiao brought everyone up, if not for the fact that he had already received the news and witnessed the shocking might just now, he would not have dared to believe that this person in front of him had the ability to overturn the continent. He walked out of the crowd, bowed, and said, "Greetings, Spiritual Master LV. I received a letter from the sect yesterday and knew that Spiritual Master was coming. Does Spiritual Master have any instructions?" LV Junyang said indifferently, "I am under the orders of the 3 palace masters to challenge the 4 demon marquises of the northern Dark Sea. Before the results are out, you don't need to do anything." Yan Buxiao didn't know about this before, so when he heard this, he couldn't help but be shocked. However, he quickly calmed himself down and agreed. Seeing that LV Junyang had no other concerns, he led his people away. LV Junyang stood quietly for a moment, then took out a book that was half a foot long from his sleeve. With a shake of his wrist, there was a sound of thunder, and a golden light flew towards the north. LV Junyang had just arrived in the continent when the 4 demon marquises sensed his soaring aura. The 4 immediately put down everything they were doing and gathered in the main hall. The Bat tribe leader Yan Huiguang looked at the other 3 and said, "Does everyone know what the Qinsang school is trying to do? Is it going to attack my ancestral court?" Chu Yu's voice was loud and clear, and his words shook the main hall. "I don't think so. If the Qinsang school was really going to do this, they wouldn't have only sent 1 person here and still stayed at the snake beheading cliff. I think it's to prevent us from killing their disciples." Yan Huiguang said, "That makes sense, but to avoid any accidents, we still have to be on our guard." Chu Yu said, "Of course." The ape tribe leader Li Fu said, "Who is it? Do the 3 of you know him?" The 3 shook their heads. Li Fu sighed and said, "If that's the case, the Qinsang school has gained another grotto heaven." The hall instantly fell into silence. Back then, when the tribes of the North Darkness continent were at their peak, they were still defeated by the 12 grotto heavens. Now, the Qinsang school's strength was even stronger than before. They didn't know how they would avoid the calamity when it came. Li Fu seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly stood up and looked towards the south. He saw a golden light flying over. It looked like a letter. When it arrived outside the palace, he stretched out his hand and grabbed it. He took a look at it and said, "Battle letter. So that's what they're planning. Everyone, take a look." As he said, he threw the letter into the hall. After the 3 of them took it and read it, Yan Huiguang frowned and said, "I seem to have heard of the name LV Junyang." Luo Mengzi said indifferently, "This person was originally a disciple under Yan Changsheng. I didn't expect the one who came today to be this person." Chu Yu said in shock, "So he's Yan Changsheng's disciple? No wonder we couldn't recognize this person's qi dynamic. He challenged me to a battle. Should I accept it?" Li Fu said, "In the letter, if I win, the Qinsang school will leave the North Darkness continent. Just this one thing, we have no choice but to accept." Then, he laughed at himself. "Even if I lose, it's just the situation now." Yan Huiguang humphed and said, "Why does Marquis Li have to say so? This letter is an invitation to a battle, and it doesn't mention the number of people. Even if the Qinsang school's supernatural powers and techniques are superior, and we can't win him in a one-on-one fight, but if the 4 of us go up against him, what can LV Junyang do?" Li Fu shook his head and said, "The Qinsang school won't give us such a chance. If the 4 of us leave the Lord of Origin Palace, they will definitely kill us at all costs to eliminate all future troubles." When the 3 of them heard this, they were slightly shocked. Yan Huiguang's face was fierce. He said, "If the Qinsang school does this, aren't they afraid that we will fight back with our lives and destroy this continent?" Luo Mengzi said calmly, "That's true, but if they set it up properly, they can trap us in a talisman or a formation, and then combine the power of the 14 grotto heavens in the sect. They might be able to do it. Back then, didn't Jinren Ru Huang also die in this way?" Li Fu nodded and said, Marquis Luo is right. Originally, the Yuxiao school could still think of a way to restrain the Qinsang school, so that they can't go all out against me. But now that this sect is in a confrontation with Tao Zhenhong on the South Sea, I have already sent a letter to them, but there was no reply. I think they don't have the heart to care about the North. This time, we can only rely on ourselves. Yan Huiguang was still not satisfied. He said, everyone, what if it's 2 against 1? Luo Mengzi said, the Qinsang school's letter didn't say how many people will fight. If we provoke people like Zhang Yan, Shen Baishuang, or Sun Jian, how will we end up? Will we fight or not? Yan Huiguang's expression instantly turned ugly, and Chu Yu also kept quiet. Li Fu stroked his long beard, and his eyes lit up. He said, if that's the case, then let me fight alone and experience the supernatural powers of this Xinren Lu. Chapter 1090. When Li Fu stepped forward to accept the challenge, the 3 demon marquises could not help but feel surprised. They did not know what he was planning. However, they really couldn't think of a better way to respond to Ji Tsang's challenge. Since they couldn't face the enemy together, one of them had to come out. Since he was willing to go, they wouldn't try to dissuade him. Luo Mengzi stood up and said seriously, if Marquis Li needs anything, you can tell us. The Python tribe will definitely help. Li Fu did not stand on ceremony and said, thank you, Marquis Luo. I was also interested in borrowing your tribe's treasure. When Chu Yu and Yan Huiguang heard this, they also expressed that as long as it was their tribe's treasure, they could lend it to him. Li Fu cupped his hands and said, thank you, but this is still not enough. Ever since Taiming Grandmaster established the Qinsang school, we have been fighting for tens of thousands of years and they know us very well. Especially that Lu Junyang is Yan Changxing's disciple. Even if he had just formed his cave not long ago, if I do not have any powerful means, I might not be able to fight against him. Luo Mengzi said, Marquis Li seems to have a plan, but what do you want to do? Li Fu looked at the 3 of them and stroked his beard. Everyone should know that the dragon god left behind a few treasures. I remember that one of them is still in the hands of His Majesty. If it can be used to help me, I might be able to win this battle. As soon as he said this, the 3 of them came to a realization. It turned out that they were after this treasure from the very beginning. Luo Mengzi looked at Chu Yu and saw the latter nodding his head. He said, this battle is important. Marquis Chu and I are willing to work together with Marquis Li to convince His Majesty. What does Marquis Yan think? Yan Huiguang was a little unwilling. He also had the intention to get his hands on this item, but Ji Wang took advantage of the conflict between him and Li Fu and refused to really take it out. But now that Li Fu was going to fight Lu Junyang, it was not good for him to object. He couldn't object, so he pretended to be magnanimous and said, this marquis has no objections. After the 4 of them came to an agreement, they went to the main hall. When Ji Wang heard that the 4 demon marquises had arrived, he immediately panicked. He thought that they were going to do something to him, so he forced himself to calm down. He came out trembling with fear, but when he heard that the 4th emperor wanted him to take out the precious pill passed down by the dragon monarch, even though he was extremely unwilling, his throne was just an empty title, how could he resist? He could only take it out. As soon as Li Fu received the pill, it was as if he had obtained a priceless treasure. In his joy, he immediately showed it to the other 3. He wrote a reply on the spot and ordered a messenger to deliver it to the snake-slaying cliff. However, he was also careful and set the date of the battle to be 2 months later. This was because even if he obtained the pellet, he would still need time to refine it, at least 30 days. Moreover, he judged that LV Junyang must have come fully prepared. It was extremely inappropriate for him to rush into battle. His chances of winning were low, so he had to plan properly. LV Junyang received the reply very quickly. Seeing that the date of the battle was 2 months later, he did not oppose it. This time, the 3 temples gave him a lot of pellets, so he asked the sect to borrow a Yuntao palace. Even if he cultivated in the Grotto Heaven realm, he could meditate there to adjust his breathing and consolidate his cultivation. Moreover, With this period of time as a buffer, he could also take some time to study the various secret techniques that were passed down in Yan Chengsheng's handwritten letter. Very quickly, 2 months passed. On this day, he suddenly felt something and looked towards the northern sky. He saw a giant raft floating over. This raft seemed to be made of 2 giant logs. It was not more than 1,000 feet wide, but it was 4 to 5 miles long. There were 6 floors on it, and in front of each floor was a big drum. There were people from Kai-E tribe standing around, holding wooden staffs and precious hammers. They kept hitting the drums. From afar, one could hear the thumping sound that shook the sky and the earth. Outside the raft, there were green leaves fluttering and dancing, vibrating along with the sound of the drums. It was sometimes slow, sometimes fast, and it was very beautiful. At the highest point of the raft, a withered old man in a black robe was sitting cross-legged on a huge rattan seat. He held a walking stick in his hand, and his face was kind. His hair and beard were half black and half white, giving him the appearance of an immortal. What attracted people's attention was that beside him, there were many white-haired apes jumping around, rolling and playing. Some of them climbed onto his body, pulling his beard and robe, but he did not mind. When Lv Juanyang's gaze fell on him, he also felt it. He raised his head and cupped his hands towards the top of the tower. Lv Juanyang's expression was indifferent, and he also raised his hand to return the greeting. Li Fu smiled and used his walking stick to point at the camp of the demon tribe below, saying, "Descend there." It's Marquis Li. There were many demon cultivators kneeling on the ground on the riverbank. Most of them were those who had conflicts with the ape tribe, but there were also many demon cultivators who were still standing straight. They were the leaders of the demon tribe. Because they had not been under the control of the demon court for thousands of years, even if they recognized the 8 tribes, they did not think that they were their subordinates. Li Fu looked at them and was secretly surprised. His ape tribe was different from the other 3 demon tribes. Not only did they focus on their own tribe, but they also had many eyes and ears outside. In the past 2 months, after asking around for information, he came to the conclusion that the Qinsang school was not here to deal with them. From their actions, it was very likely that they were only here to collect spiritual items and materials from the North Dark Star continent to support the battle in the South Sea. Since the last time the Qinsang school went on an expedition, they had appointed hundreds of stewards of all sizes in the North Dark Star continent, and even built a water kingdom in the Dang region. Since then, this place was no longer under the control of the demon court. However, after the internal strife of the Qinsang school, its descendants all became independent. Therefore, the demon court had long abandoned the south and turned to manage the north continent. Even if it was temporarily occupied by the Qinsang school, there was nothing to regret. Therefore, he believed that the most important thing in this battle was to protect his own life, and not to fight to the death. As the large wooden raft landed, Luo Jiang turned into a beam of light and flew up. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Marquis Li." Li Fu smiled amiably and said, "Clan leader Luo, you don't have to be so courteous. The southern demon tribes are mostly undisciplined and rough, and do not know etiquette. But from what I see, the camp below is neat and orderly, it is your credit." Luo Jiangyu sighed and said, "Unfortunately, once that spiritual master Lu arrived, it became a plate of loose sand. I really do not know, in front of the spiritual masters, what use is this hard work?" Li Fu laughed and said, "Clan leader Luo, in today's battle, between me and that spiritual master Lu, who has a higher chance of winning?" Luo Jiangyu originally wanted to say, "Marquis Li will definitely win," but under the other's gaze, he hesitated and said, "This. I really do not know." Li Fu's smile did not change. He said, "Actually, you also know that I may not be that spiritual master Lu's opponent, and if I lose this battle, it is very likely that I will lose my life. It can be seen that even people of my generation do not have the ability to control their own life and death. Moreover, before the great calamity, everyone is the same. Why does clan leader Luo need to be so sad?" After he finished speaking, no matter what Luo Jiangyu thought, he slowly stood up with the support of his crutch and said loudly, "Spiritual Master Lu, I have already arrived as promised, please come out for a while." The voice spread far away, and everyone on both sides of the river heard it clearly. They all raised their heads and looked towards the sky at the same time. Lu Junyang heard Li Fu's challenge and stood up. He calmly walked out of the Yuntao palace. Once he was outside, he suddenly felt something. He raised his head slightly and noticed that there was a spirit stone-like treasure hanging high above the clouds, faintly covering the spiritual vigor below. With his eyesight, it was not difficult for him to recognize that this was Huixian's 36 mountains. He knew that this should be used to defend against demon cultivators. Hence, he did not look further and stepped into the air. With every step he took, there would be a cloud of white smoke floating outwards, and he calmly walked forward. And on the other side, Li Fu also rode on a green cloud and came up. The two of them stopped at the riverside, and after greeting each other, Li Fu said, "Spiritual Master Lu, I think that you, Qin Song, also do not want to see the North Underworld continent broken, so we can only choose another place to fight. I think that the North Sea is quite suitable, what do you think?" Lu Junyang practiced both metal and fire xian techniques, so he went to the sea to fight. If he went to the sea to fight, he would have half of the home advantage, and the other party would not know. However, since he made such a choice, he must have something to rely on. He looked over and coldly replied, "Okay." Since it was decided, the two of them turned into two rays of clear light and flew towards the northwest direction. At the same time, Qi Yuntian, Zhang Yan, and Huixian were sitting in the upper extreme hall. In front of them, there was a smooth jade wall that reflected the current situation. As for the other 10 Grotto Heaven Taoists of the Dark Azure sect, they were all sitting upright in their own cave abodes at this moment, and they were also using their own means to pay attention to the battle situation at any time. If the Northern Underworld demon cultivator dared to make any strange movements, they would naturally act together to suppress it and completely eliminate this disaster. Almost at the same time, above the South Sea, Tao Xinren said, "Today is the day when Spiritual Master Lu and the 8 Demon Marquis fight, we should also take action." Zhang Yan previously wrote that in order to prevent Yuxiao School from interfering in the affairs of the North, if possible, they could try to fake an attack. Therefore, he had been watching the construction of the altar these days and did not take action. He was prepared to launch an attack at this time without sparing any mana. Li Xiaomi said, "After months of preparation, today is the day. If it goes well, we can destroy the arrangement on the Fengling Ocean again." These days, he was more proficient in controlling the mirage worm, and he had fed it a lot of inferior jade. The range of the worm's illusory fog was getting wider and wider. If the previous strategy could be successfully carried out and the fog shrouded the opponent's head, then the battle would be half won. Tao Xinren said, "Don't underestimate the opponent. Last time, the two of them had many methods that they did not use. This time, we don't want to achieve anything, as long as we can attract the people of Yuxiao School to help us and make them unable to care about the affairs of the North, then our plan will succeed." Mi Xinren listened to him and was a little impatient, "So when do we take action?" Tao Xinren smiled and nodded to Li Xiaomi. The latter did not hesitate to use his mana and a clear air rose to the sky, forming a huge thunder cloud in the vault of heaven. Then, he turned into a Jiao dragon and entered the cloud. The cloud rumbled and slowly moved towards the direction of Fengling Ocean. And under the deep sea, the mirage worm also left the formation and carefully followed. Wherever it passed, the illusory fog continued to spread on the sea. Under its master's support from above, it created a shocking scene of 3,000 feet of waves and a torrent engulfing the land. This impetus was so great that it caused Zhou Ruiying and Wu Yunbi's expressions to change abruptly, and they sat on the altar while waiting with full concentration. And in Yuxiao School, Zhu Jin seemed to have noticed that the attack of Tao Zhenhong and the other two was a little unusual and had no choice but to cast their attention in the direction of the South Sea. And with such a move from the two major sects, clear air spread. From the south to the north, the sky of the 3 continents was faintly filled with a murderous aura. The various sects in the Donghua continent also felt that something was wrong. Regardless of whether it was the mystic demons, they were all shocked and wary. Even those who were meditating and observing also retreated one after another to sense the aura and observe the situation, just in case of any changes. After flying for an hour, Lu and Li Junyang left the North Dark Star continent and came to the North Sea. However, fighting here could still bring disaster to the continent, so the two did not stop. After another 2 hours, they stopped just now. At this moment, all they could see was the vast waves of the vast sea. There were originally several North Sea demon whales that were as huge as mountains, but when the two arrived, they all fled in panic. Li Fu said, "Jinren Lu, what do you think of this place?" Lu Junyang looked around and said, "We can fight." The two's eyes met, and as if they had a tacit understanding, they both retreated far away. When Li Fu was far away, he shouted, "Jinren Lu, please excuse me." With a light flick of his sleeve, a flying rock shot out. However, when it was in midair, it kept tumbling and changing. In the end, it had already turned into a mountain range that pressed down on LV Junyang. Although he was proficient in the Qi path, he knew that his mana could not compare to his opponent's. Therefore, he did not use his Dharma and threw out this item. He only wanted to test the depth of his opponent. LV Junyang saw that when the mountain came down, the light above his head instantly dimmed. He did not intend to block it and wanted to dodge, but after trying, he realized that he was being held down by a strong force. If he wanted to break free, it would not be difficult, but it would consume a lot of mana, so he might as well face it head-on. Moreover, this was the first time he fought someone after entering the cave. Naturally, he did not want to retreat right away. He channeled his mana, and suddenly, an uncountable amount of white light and golden chi flew out from his back, intertwining with each other as if weaving a net. With just a swirl, the small mountain was disintegrated into countless tiny pieces in the blink of an eye, scattering into the sea. At the same time, he flicked his finger, and there was a rumbling sound. The sky was filled with lightning, and hundreds of golden white lightning bolts jumped out. Li Fu was shocked, and said, "Reduce the damage of the golden lightning?" This was the divine lightning formed by the combination of the metal and water techniques. It was extremely powerful, and it was especially harmful to demons and devils. Fortunately, he was already on guard. He lifted his sleeve and leaned back. He circulated his mana and a layer of bright light appeared on his body. Although the lightning bolts kept exploding, they couldn't harm him in the slightest. At the same time, he was still retreating, and he kept changing his position. He had previously ordered people to investigate the situation of Lu Juanyang's battle in Yuanying state, and he knew that this person's fighting style was similar to his master, Yan Changsheng. Once he was suppressed, it would be very difficult to resolve. Although the opponent had entered the image realm, this kind of style was not something that could be changed easily, so he did not dare to stay where he was. When the last lightning bolt dissipated, he stopped the crutch in his hand, and his whole body flashed. He actually split into two, one on each side, and stood at the east and west ends. It was difficult to distinguish which was which. He wanted to use this to stop the opponent, and not give him the chance to continuously attack. Chapter 1091. LV Junyang saw that Li Fu had split into two. Although there was no difference in appearance, it was not exactly the same. He still remembered that just now, Li Fu was wearing a black robe while the two in front of him were in gray and white. He did not know which one was real and which one was fake. He did not attack immediately. Instead, he shot out 2 rays of silver light from between his brows and attacked from both sides. The gray-robed Li Fu chuckled. He raised his walking stick and knocked it lightly. The spiritual shuttle was knocked away and flew to an unknown place. The white-robed Li Fu breathed out a white smoke from his nose. It coiled around the spiritual shuttle and made it go around in circles. It could not come out for a while. LV Junyang did not throw the spiritual shuttle to hurt the enemy but to identify the location of the enemy's real body. After trying it out, his senses told him that both of them were real. It was very similar to the technique of transforming essence into body. He confirmed that if there was no accident, the enemy knew that he could use the flying shuttle to probe the spiritual opportunity. Hence, he used some tricks to make it difficult for him to see through the actual situation. This was also the reason why he did not cultivate the senses. If his master, Yan Changsheng, were to use the spiritual shuttle here, he would be able to see clearly the changes in the spiritual opportunity in the domain that he occupied. It would be impossible for the enemy to hide from him. Although the investigation was fruitless, he did not look surprised. There was a way to counter any trick. When Li Fu purposely set the date of the battle 2 months later, he had already expected it. Naturally, if he had the supernatural power of clear sound of 9 mountains, he would be able to force the enemy to show himself immediately. However, the enemy's clone appeared so casually. It was obviously a small trick. If he were to make a big fuss over it, even if he were to break it, the mana consumed would be much more than the enemy. The loss outweighed the gain. Hence, he made a gesture and spots of silver-white light flew up from his back. Then, they shot forward like lightning. This time, he took out hundreds of flying shuttles in one go. The two Li Fuss exclaimed. They knew that they could not deal with it as calmly as just now. The gray-robed one flicked his sleeve and took out a triangular red handkerchief. He spun it. It actually covered a few li, many shuttles hit it, many of them lost their strength and spiritual vigor. If they were not lightly bounced back, they would fall from the sky. Although this magical weapon was refined with some magnetic force, it was able to restrain metal objects. However, as the flying shuttle continued to attack, the spiritual vigor on it was quickly shaved off. Soon, the flying shuttle would be pierced through. Not daring to stay any longer, he flew far away on a streak of light. As for the white-robed Li Fu, he chanted a few incantations and the white smoke expanded several times, enveloping all of the flying shuttles and disappearing without a trace. LV Junyang suddenly felt that the shuttle's connection was cut off, but his expression did not change. The number of spiritual shuttles he had refined was only 9. When he formed his heavenly abode, he also used a portion of his essence energy to nourish it. To the current him, they were all ordinary items. Just now, all of them were of this type. Even if they were taken away, it wouldn't be a big deal. After this battle, it would only take a few hours to return. He could refine it again. However, just now, he had already seen through some clues. He reached out and pointed forwards, only to hear the sound of the air being torn apart. Numerous streaks of golden energy were like swords, stretching out a long line. From 10 miles away, they slashed towards the two Li Fuss. The white-robed Li Fu stomped his feet and a white cloud floated beneath his feet. He hid in it and disappeared. When the golden energy slashed over, it was like there was nothing there, passing through it. After a short while, he came out from the cloud once more. As for the gray-robed Li Fu, he pointed his walking stick upwards. A bright light appeared and protected his body. When the golden energy slashed over, it was like it was slashing onto a glass cover. It gave off a cracking sound, but it was unable to break through. However, the golden energy was like silk, continuous and continuous. When the front disappeared, the back would catch up. After 1 or 2 breaths, cracks appeared on the golden light cover. The gray-robed Li Fu saw that the situation wasn't good, so he hurriedly dodged. But right at this moment, LV Junyang suddenly waved his hand, and one of the flying shuttles that was trapped in the clouds swiftly jumped out, and then it flew out like an arrow, and the direction it was heading towards was the white-clothed Li Fu. With a flash of brilliance, it pierced through his body, and the latter's face stiffened. After a short moment, his entire body melted away and transformed into a ball of clear air, and only a damaged talisman and a ball of white air that was shaped like cotton wadding remained where he was. The gray-robed Li Fu was startled when he saw this. However, how could he be distracted in a battle formation? Just when he was distracted, the golden energy behind him had already caught up. It slashed across his body and broke apart, turning into a broken talisman. The walking stick also floated in midair. At that moment, there was a flash of light in midair. A flag gate appeared, and another Li Fu walked out from it. He opened his sleeves and put the walking stick and the white energy into his sleeves. He cupped his hands and said, it's just a small technique. Please forgive me, Sage LV Junyang said indifferently, this is not a small technique. Using a talisman to store spiritual vigor, and using the blood essence of the talisman to transform into a figure, while hiding at the side to defend. This is a powerful Dao technique. If I didn't have a divine ability today, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to break it. It's a pity that I don't have a soul. In the eyes of the Fang family, it's a huge flaw. When Li Fu's two doppelgangers responded to his probing, it looked like they parried at the same time, but in fact, it was done one after the other. Moreover, it was the same for 2 consecutive times. However, if the 2 talismans had a soul attached to them, it wouldn't be like this. It was this subtle difference that allowed him to see the flaw. Li Fu shook his head and said, this is easier said than done. What I cultivate is a Xianmen technique, not a demonic sect technique. Otherwise, I would be able to do this. Although he replied, he was very surprised and thought to himself, strange, why is this person so patient today? He didn't come to attack me forcefully, but instead discuss techniques with me. Could it be that he has changed his character? What he didn't know was that although LV Junyang preferred to suppress his opponent in fights of techniques, it was based on the fact that he had a thorough understanding of his own divine ability. After entering the heavenly abode, knowing oneself and Yuanying were completely different. Everything was like starting from the beginning. Just like before Huxian fought the Sky Demon, he also needed to fight with Zhang Yan to know his own strengths and weaknesses. However, he didn't have such an opportunity, so he naturally had to fight steadily and surely. If the other party was willing to continue practicing with him like this, he would also be more than happy. Why would he use such a quick and sudden attack? Just now, Li Fu didn't think too much about it, but at this moment, he seemed to have noticed something. He thought to himself, so he's using me as a stepping stone. What a good scheme. Looking at him, he hasn't received any guidance from the sect, and it's also the first time he's fighting with me. That's right, Yan Chongsheng broke out of the sect and sowed enmity with the Qinsang master and disciple family. Even if he was called back to the sect by Qin Mabai, his peers in the sect might not be on good terms with him. I was too careful earlier. I can't slowly waste my time with him, or else when he's skilled, it'll be even more difficult for me to defeat him. Thinking of this, he didn't want to continue weighing and testing. Instead, he took a step back and shook his body. After a loud sound, a vast expanse of white fog soared into the sky and dispersed for thousands of miles. An illusion of a white ape stood within it. It had 4 long arms, long snowy eyebrows, and a beard fluttering under its chin. It had a wide chest and back, and it was half squatting and half standing. Countless auspicious lights and auspicious auras curled around its body, and clouds appeared under its feet. The ripples came and went, sometimes rolling and sometimes relaxing. LV Junyang could feel it. At this moment, the number of eyes in the sky suddenly increased. Under normal circumstances, the moment the other party displayed his dharma, his aura would be at its peak. If he was confident, he could dodge a little. When the sharpness passed, he would come back and suppress it. However, he was here under the orders of the Qinsang. If he retreated in front of the world's perfected ones without fighting, it would damage the sect's prestige. Therefore, he released his own dharma. He also released his own dharma form. Suddenly, the sound of waves surged between heaven and earth. Behind him, a long river of golden qi surged out, stretching for thousands of miles. Then, it spiraled upwards, turning 36 times in a row. Wherever it passed, there was a white light like a rainbow, dazzling like lightning, shining brightly. After Li Fu displayed his dharma, he took the initiative to attack. With a push of his mana, the fierce ape dharma leaped forward and slammed fiercely. LV Junyang's eyes were calm. With a push of his mind, the golden river turned into thousands of miles of water and met the attack head-on. When the 2 dharma images collided, it caused a loud sound that could split the mountains and split the earth. The seawater below was pushed outwards, setting off thousands of feet of waves. When it reached the sky, it rolled back down again. When he looked again, he saw that the golden and water energies continued to rush forward. A white ape with its fur all curled up was roaring and waving its 4 arms. As it punched and tore, water splattered and white energy shot out. Although it continued to destroy the white ape, the more it fought, the more injuries it suffered. At the same time, the golden river of water seemed to have reduced a lot. After the two of them fought like this for a moment, LV Junyang grunted and took the initiative to retreat. The difference in their transcendence energy was actually similar, but LV Junyang had just formed his grotto heaven, so his primordial essence chi was still full. If they continued fighting like this, he would suffer more. He did not come here to fight with his life. Since he could not defeat his opponent with his mana, then he would fight in a different way. However, when he retreated, LV Junyang was not willing to let him go. The long river rushed forward and took the opportunity to chase after him. Li Fu frowned. The battle of mana had always been dangerous, especially for him who was the first to retreat. If he did not handle it well, it was very likely that he would be chased all the way until he lost. Luckily, he had already thought of a way out. He took out a copper mace and threw it towards the sky. This treasure was borrowed from Tsuyue. It was a real weapon that had the ability to split mana and vibrate spiritual vigor. Although it was not a treasure to kill, if it hit the opponent's technique, it would definitely destroy a part of the opponent's vitality. To a grotto heaven cultivator who valued his life, it was also a threat. However, before the mace landed, there was a ray of yellow light on the opposite side. It collided with the mace and could not land. Li Fu took a look and realized that it was a deer horn. His heart could not help but tremble. From the appearance, he could tell that this was the horn on the head of the deer tribe leader. However, he did not expect that the Qinsang school had already taken it and refined it into a real weapon. He thought about the origin of this item and that he was now under the gaze of more than 10 Qinsang grotto heaven jinren. His momentum could not help but be depressed. LV Junyang immediately noticed it. His mana was like a wave that pushed it up another level. At the same time, countless silver-white flying shuttles surged out from the golden water. These were all made by mana. They did not aim to hurt the enemy, but to disturb the enemy's mind. Li Fu dared not guarantee that there was nothing strange in these flying shuttles. He shook his sleeve and a cloud of white smoke flew out from his sleeve. It covered the sky and took all the flying shuttles into it. This was a supernatural power that he had refined based on the Daluo heavenly sleeve technique of the Qinsang school. It was called small sleeve technique. As long as the spiritual vigor of the object was not too strong, it could be taken in. LV Junyang stood in the white gas and golden water and said coldly, "I heard that Marquis Li of the Demon Court has a strange mind. He was born with the heart of 7 orifices and can imitate other supernatural powers and Dao techniques. It seems like it is true." Li Fu chuckled and said, "I am ashamed. As long as the world does not laugh at me for being a monkey wearing a crown, it is fine." Although the two of them were talking, the Dharma did not stop clashing. The white ape was now covered in wounds and had lost one of its 4 arms. Although it could recover if it jumped out of the battle ring and circulated its mana, it could not do so as it was forced by the white river of golden gas. If the ape's dharma collapsed, its vitality and chi would be greatly damaged. Even if it did not die, it would not be able to continue fighting. Li Fu knew that if he wanted to escape at this point, he would not be able to do so without suffering some losses. He snorted and with a rumble, the dharma dispersed. However, it split into tens of thousands of little apes and scattered in all directions. Although many of them were sucked into the river of golden gas, there were not many casualties. This was a supernatural power that he had imitated the methods of the devil sect. It took him close to 1,000 years to barely master, and it was called 100 Leaves and 1,000 Branches. When this supernatural power was used, the vitality and chi could be divided and combined at will. It could be said that each of them was his body. However, this technique required a spiritual treasure from the ape tribe to be used. If this item was missing, it would be difficult to use this supernatural power. Apart from that, this technique had a major weakness. Fortunately, he had already made up for this weakness when he came out. LV Juanyang's gaze swept across the area. He opened his mouth slightly and exhaled. Suddenly, the sound of metal shaking and jade shattering rang out. As the sound spread out, the seawater below began to surge as if it was boiling. Li Fu, on the other hand, had already tossed an item into the air before he could speak. A light barrier appeared out of thin air, isolating the two sides. As soon as the sound arrived, although it caused the light barrier to fluctuate, it was blocked outside. It really is the voiceless sound of 9 mountains. That was close. Li Fu also felt a lingering fear. The treasure that he threw was the returning light shield that he borrowed from the Bat tribe. It was used to prevent the opponent from using this supernatural power to hurt him after he transformed into a clone. Fortunately, just now, he was able to predict the opponent's move. If he was slightly slower, he might have been killed on the spot. However, before he could form his dharma, he saw clouds of golden gas coming down from the sky. Not only that, there were also white mists rising from the surface of the sea. His expression changed as he recognized the other supernatural power of the Qinsang school, illusionary jade smoke. This supernatural power was best for group battles. It could also block his external senses and was extremely effective against the cloning technique. The returning light shield could only cover the front. This kind of magical power belonged to the water element, so it could really be said to be all-pervasive. At this moment, he couldn't care about hiding anymore. He immediately took out a treasure pill that was overflowing with brilliance. With just a gentle shake, a shadow of a dragon emerged from the pill. When it came out, it was still blurry. However, under the nourishment of the water vapor that was everywhere and the spiritual vigor that was scattered just now, it gradually became full and real. A huge pressure instantly spread between the sea and the sky. It glanced at the dragon's eyes and with a low groan, it shook its long body gently and dispersed all the clouds that were attacking it. Chapter 1092. The moment Li Fu released the shadow of the true dragon, Zhang Yan and the others who were sitting in the upper extreme hall saw it clearly from the jade disc. Hu Xian asked, could it be the true dragon's essence? I heard that this item was refined by the dragon monarch, Ji Wuwang. It can be used to manipulate the waters of the 4 seas. No wonder Li Fu chose to fight on the sea. Qi Yuntian looked for a while and said in a deep voice, it is indeed this item. When we, Qinsang, conquered the northern underworld, this treasure was on our list. But at the last moment, Yu Xiao took the jade cliff first. In order to prevent the continent from collapsing, we had to let the remnants of the demon court go. If Jinren Lu can get this item this time, it will not be a pity to let Li Fu go. It will be of great use when the calamity comes. Hu Xian said, although this true dragon's essence cannot be compared to the dragon monarch's, it is still a part of his spirit. If Jinren Lu has the help of the northern underworld sword, there will be no need to worry. How will he deal with it now? Zhang Yan smiled and said, before Jinren Lu went to battle, he has already read the sex records about the northern underworld continent. If he is prepared, he should be prepared for this item. But if he is careless, he can't blame others even if he loses. Hu Xian pondered for a while. The dragon monarch's essence was hard to control. To win this battle, he must rely on the real treasure. He asked, senior apprentice brother, do you know what treasures Jinren Lu borrowed? Qi Yuntian said, I do not know either. But before Jinren Lu chose the real treasure, he went to visit the sect master Jinren. I think he must have told him about it. Hu Xian listened and nodded thoughtfully. Zhang Yan nodded inwardly. If LV Junyang was personally instructed by sect leader Qin, then they wouldn't have to worry about the treasure pill anymore. He said resolutely, this is the cause and effect of Qinsang. There is no need for outsiders to peep at the battle between the two of them. With a wave of his sleeve, the surging Xianshui above the great lake of Dragon Abyss suddenly became unrestrained and rushed out of the continent. Then, it spread out and quickly covered the place where the two of them were fighting with their spiritual vigor. North Sea. When LV Junyang saw the true dragon's soul essence, a strange light flashed in his eyes. He withdrew his Dharma idol and retreated for the first time since the start of the battle. Li Fu wanted to use his magic power to give chase. Unfortunately, the pill in his hand shook. It turned out that the true dragon's soul essence was unwilling to listen to his control and wanted to break free. After all, he was only an 8-demon marquis and not of the Ji family's bloodline. Even if he had the cultivation of an elephant, it would be difficult for him to truly control this thing. He had no choice but to withdraw his Dharma idol and suppress it with all his might. At this moment, he purposely put on a strenuous expression. If LV Junyang attacked at this moment, it would be exactly what he wanted. He was a demon, and the other party was a human cultivator. The true dragon's soul essence refused to be controlled by him, and it could distinguish between friend and foe. However, when he glanced over, he saw that LV Junyang was not coming over. LV Junyang was only looking at him quietly, as if waiting for him to surrender. He knew that he could not deceive the other party. Thus, he did not pretend anymore and simply stood there in a dignified manner. Half an hour later. In the end, he managed to tame the dragon a little. For this, he used up a large portion of his spiritual energy. However, it was worth it. With the help of this item, it would be difficult for the other party to defeat him. During this period of time, LV Junyang stood outside and slowly recovered his spiritual energy. At the same time, he seemed to be silently preparing for something. After a long time, suddenly, he felt that the surroundings seemed to have calmed down. The wind and waves also seemed to have lessened. He looked over and saw that the true dragon's soul essence was no longer struggling. Its eyes were tightly shut, and its long body floated up and down in the sky. It seemed to be moving along with its breathing, but it also seemed to be in a deep sleep. Li Fu laughed and said, "Spiritual Master LV, sorry to keep you waiting." He placed his hand on the pill and pointed forward, saying, "Go." The true dragon's soul essence suddenly trembled, as if it was awakened from its sleep. Its eyes suddenly opened, and as its fierce eyes moved a few times, its whole body emitted a fierce aura. When it saw LV Junyang under the guidance of Li Fu's spirit, it let out an angry roar. It lowered its head, arched its back, and bent its claws. After accumulating enough energy, it leaped forward. As it moved, thousands of hectares of seawater were also swept up, causing the waves to roll forward. This dragon, from head to tail, was 1,000 feet long. The scales on its body were dark and glossy. It was thick and dense, and its claws and teeth were sharp. One could not tell that it was formed from the soul essence. It was much better than when it first came out. It was obvious that Li Fu was just now nourishing it with his spiritual energy. Seeing that it was getting closer and closer, LV Junyang's feet stomped, and his body suddenly disappeared. He used the small heaven-shifting escape technique and retreated dozens of miles away. With a rumble, the dragon god's soul essence missed its grasp. It twisted its body and turned around to follow. Even though it was just a strand of the dragon god's soul essence, it still had some abilities. Even without using any supernatural powers or spells, it could cause great damage to the cultivators of the heavenly abode with its brute force. LV Junyang took advantage of the time when it was moving in the clouds to bend and flick his fingers, releasing dozens of lesser injury golden thunder. The dragon god's soul essence did not dodge and let the thunder fall on its body. But strangely, in the midst of the crackling sound, the thunder was blocked by a layer of majestic water vapor around its body. After a series of electric snakes flashed, it dissipated between heaven and earth. Li Fu stroked his beard and smiled. In a battle on the sea, this dragon god's soul essence could attract endless water vapor to protect its body. The threat of thunder to it was greatly reduced. If it was not so, why would he choose this place for the battle? One must know that the abundant water was also greatly beneficial to the cultivators of the Qinsang school who practiced water techniques. LV Junyang saw that the thunder technique could not harm this dragon, so he channeled his mana. The white light under his feet turned into a river, and a few golden rainbows flew out from it. Each of them shone for 100 miles and slashed across the sky. However, when they slashed the dragon's body, they passed through it as if they were slashing an illusion. Seeing that it was still useless, he opened his mouth and used the 9 Great Mountain Clear Sound technique. This time, the true dragon's soul essence was no longer unscathed. The scales on its body were shattered as if they had been forcibly peeled off. It let out an angry roar and rolled around in the water vapor. Boundless spiritual vitality gathered, and it instantly recovered. LV Juanyang's eyes narrowed. At this moment, he had already understood that this dragon god's soul essence could absorb the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. Unless he could destroy it with one blow or use a supernatural power magic treasure to isolate it from the inside and outside, no matter what he did, it would be useless. Fortunately, its escape technique was not fast, so it was not without flaws. He turned to look at the treasure pill in Li Fu's hand and knew that this item was the key. When Li Fu was chasing the dragon god's soul essence, he stood at the same place without moving. It was not that he did not want to attack together with the dragon god's soul essence, but controlling the treasure pill required a lot of his energy. In addition, he had used up a lot of mana when he was suppressing it just now. When he returned, he did not know how long he would need to cultivate to recover. Since he was already able to suppress his opponent, why waste his strength in vain? When LV Junyang fought with the dragon god's soul essence for a while, he had already confirmed that other than brute force, it did not have any supernatural power. However, if he continued to fight like this, his mana would be exhausted. But before that, the threat was not big. Naturally, it could also be that Li Fu did this on purpose so that he would let his guard down before using it. However, as long as he was careful, he would not lose when facing this thing. At this moment, he had a plan in his heart. He tapped the ground and used a teleportation ability. His body had already turned several hundred miles away. Taking advantage of the fact that the soul essence had yet to catch up to him, he took out a spell and separated a ball of origin essence chi. He stretched out his hand and pointed at it. In an instant, it turned into a person wearing a white robe and had an otherworldly bearing. It was no different from his own body. The two of them split up and the essence energy charged towards the dragon god's soul essence. As for himself, he headed right for Li Fu. Li Fu was startled and his expression changed. He had a deep understanding of the clone technique and right away he could tell that this was a mysterious yang spirit body. This was formed from the essence energy of a grotto heaven cultivator. Apart from the difference in mana, there was no other difference from the real body. It could use all sorts of treasures and abilities. If he was at his peak, he naturally wouldn't fear it. Just now, to suppress the treasure pill, he consumed a lot of mana. Even if the mysterious Yang clone only had 40 to 50% of LV Juanyang's essence energy, it was enough to fight on the same level as him. The key was that he had to split his attention to control the soul essence. It was tough for him to take care of both sides. He couldn't help but feel a bit of respect. Although this wasn't a strong technique, it required a lot of courage. Once the mysterious Yang clone was destroyed, there was no way to make up for it. How much essence energy was split would be lost. Apart from some cultivators who were confident in their skills, very few people dared to use it in a battle. He tossed out a ball of white smoke from his sleeve, then took out a talisman paper refined with blood essence and slapped it on the talisman paper. Then, he activated his technique and created a doppelganger. He handed the precious pill to the doppelganger and let it play with the true dragon's soul essence. Meanwhile, he took out a crutch and threw it towards the sky, then struck it towards LV Junyang who was rushing over. LV Junyang saw that the thing that flew over wasn't a true artifact but he didn't dodge. When he thought about it, an endless river of gold energy rose up behind him. When the crutch struck into the river, it could only shake off the golden chi within a radius of 1,000 feet. To the entire golden chi river, it was only a few splashes. Even though it would lose some of its mana, its momentum would not stop because of this. Li Fu saw that he was coming fiercely, as if he was going to fight him head-on like before. How could he be willing and retreat? At this time, he felt something and glanced out. He saw that the dragon god's soul essence was moving further and further away under the guidance of LV Junyang's mysterious young clone. He thought, are they trying to separate us so that we can't help each other? That's fine, I'll fight here for a while. That mysterious young clone is a help, but it is also a weakness. If I can borrow the power of Shijun's soul essence to destroy it, let's see how he can fight me. He pushed off with his feet, and white smoke rose up. He rushed up and then grabbed downwards. A stream of white smoke came out from his hands, and when it was far away, it gathered into 2 large palms. He then clenched them into fists and smashed down fiercely at the place where the gold energy river was. This mystique was modeled after Zhang Yan's mysterious yellow dragon capturing palm, and it was called the Immortal Ape Palm. Although it did not have the support of Zhang Yan's tyrannical spiritual power, its power was not great. However, its advantage was that its fingers and palm were nimble, and it had many subtle variations. LV Junyang did not retreat. He straightened his back, and the river of water behind him spiraled upwards. Streams of white mist circled around the 2 hands. Once the 2 hands were trapped inside, with just a turn, the 2 hands were stirred up and scattered. Li Fu took this chance to retreat a little, and LV Junyang chased closely. The 2 of them chased and dodged, fighting and stopping. In a short while, they had traveled tens of thousands of miles. The seawater was stirred up by their mana, and the true dragon soul essence was nowhere to be found. LV Junyang once again closed the distance between the 2 of them. He suddenly shook his sleeve and threw out an item. It looked like a compass. When it reached the outside, it turned slightly, and at the same time, the Xian Yang clone that was fighting with the true dragon soul essence suddenly disappeared. When it appeared again, it was already standing on this compass. This was another true treasure that he had borrowed from the sect, and it was called Stepping Star Net. This item could split into 2. Even if they were tens of thousands of miles apart, it only needed a breath to guide people or dharma bodies over. He pointed with a finger, and the Xian Yang clone flashed and returned to his body. In an instant, his mana was full again. The river behind him rumbled, and it traveled another 1,000 miles. Li Fu couldn't help but be shocked. Only now did he know that the opponent had purposely led the 2 of them apart for this moment. Just now, he could still fight for a while, but LV Junyang, who had merged his avatar into one, was not someone he could deal with. He immediately put away his dharma, turned into a cloud of smoke, and wanted to escape. Since LV Junyang had set up this killing trap, he naturally wouldn't let him escape. He took out an item from his sleeve and tossed it into the sky. An invisible aura descended and shrouded the surrounding 10,000 miles. It was called the Origin Time Aura Shield, and it was a true treasure made by his master, Yan Changsheng. Once it trapped the enemy, they wouldn't be able to escape. Only the owner of the treasure could enter and exit freely. When he was in the Yuanying realm, he relied on this item to trap and kill Lu Rongyang. Even though she had the Yellow Springs escape technique, she still couldn't escape. Li Fu saw that the situation wasn't good and that he had nowhere to run. He quickly formed a spell and wanted to hide in the cave. If he hid in there, it would be the same as admitting defeat, but it was better than losing his life. He was shocked to find that there must be a disturbance in the air, and he couldn't move inside. Seeing that the enemy was trapped, LV Junyang's body flashed, and he wrapped the river Dharma to chase down. When he got close, he stopped and stood on the river, looking down, and said calmly, "Marquis Li, you have lost." Li Fu was quick-witted, and when he heard this, his heart moved. The opponent didn't seem to want to kill him, so he said, "Jinren Lu, do you have anything to say?" LV Junyang said, "If Marquis Li can give the pill in your hand to my Qinsang school, I can let Jinren Li go." Li Fu was stunned, then stroked his beard, looked up, and said, "Jinren Lu, it's not that I don't believe you, but can you really make a decision on this matter?" LV Junyang flicked his sleeve and threw a jade talisman over, saying, "As long as Marquis Li gives the pill to me, you can use this talisman to return to the northern underworld continent, and no one will stop you." Li Fu took it and saw that it was a Qinsang pardon talisman. He couldn't help but say, "So your sect has been thinking about this pill for a long time." LV Junyang said indifferently, "Marquis Li only needs to say whether you are willing or not." Li Fu understood that if it wasn't for the fear that he would destroy the item, Qinsung School wouldn't have used this method. The opponent could have just killed him and snatched it. However, he wasn't willing to lose his life for a treasure, so he threw the pill over without hesitation. LV Junyang took it and looked at it. With a wave of his hand, the Yuanshan Qi shield was taken back. Li Fu felt his body lighten, as if there was no longer any barrier between him and his own cave. At this moment, even if he had the jade talisman, he didn't dare to completely trust Qinsung School. Therefore, he used his technique, and a mist shrouded his body. When it dissipated, he had already disappeared. Seeing that Li Fu had left, LV Junyang also turned and headed south. The next moment, a white rainbow flew in the direction of Qinsung. Chapter 1093. In the upper extreme hall of Qinsung School, Zhang Yan saw that LV Junyang had defeated Li Fu. He pondered for a moment and said, "The South Sea is still fighting. Since this is over, we should inform Tao Zhenren and the others." With a surge of his spirit intent, he used his magic power to condense a talisman. With a flick of his finger, a rainbow light flew towards the south and disappeared. Not long after, in the sky above the great pool of Dragon Abyss, a ray of light flew into the floating heavenly palace. A boy entered the palace and reported, "Enlightened Master Lu is already outside the palace." Qi Yuntian said, "Please come to the hall, Spiritual Master Lu." LV Junyang walked in from the outside. Behind him were two flashing treasure lights. They were the two true treasures that he had borrowed from the sect. As soon as he stepped into the hall, he flashed and flew up to the top of the floating heavenly palace. He steadily walked to the front of the three people, cupped his fists and said, "Greetings, hall masters." Qi Yuntian raised his hand and said in a friendly tone, "Spiritual Master Lu, you don't have to be so courteous. You've defeated Li Fu of the Demon Marquis Ape Tribe, which is a great contribution to the sect. From today onwards, Spiritual Master will be the guardian elder of the upper extreme palace." As soon as he finished speaking, a boy came up with a jade plate. He held it up with both hands and placed it above his head. LV Junyang looked down and saw that there was a jade talisman in a plain robe, a crown, and a magic sword. All of them were overflowing with brilliance and the aura of treasures was dense. With a sweep of his sleeves, he put everything into his pouch. Then, he bowed and said, "Junyang accepts the order." Qi Yuntian smiled and said, "Elder Lu must have suffered a lot from the battle. Since you are an elder of our hall, you can use any medicine in the hall to help you recover your mana faster." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "In the past, I had a battle with Zhenren Yan. Before he passed away, he entrusted his cave to me. I promised that if one day I have the power to protect myself, I will return it to him. Today, I will fulfill my promise." As he spoke, he tossed his hand out. He handed over a jade talisman. LV Junyang stretched out his hand to receive it. He looked at it silently for a while and carefully kept it. He said, "May I ask Hall Master Du Zhen, is the primordial spirit of my teacher safe?" Zhang Yan smiled. "Back then, I invited perfected Master Yan's primordial spirit to be sealed in the spirit sealing jade, which is now stored in the cave. Although a long time has passed, with the replenishment of spiritual opportunity, there should be no problem." LV Junyang was silent for a moment. He bowed to him and said solemnly, "Junyang thanks perfected Zhang for protecting me all these years." Even though he was cultivating these years, he did not forget his teacher's kindness. There were several times when he feared that Yan Chengsheng's primordial spirit would be hard to protect. It was only because he was weak that he was powerless. There had been a rumor in his sect that Yan Chengsheng's soul had long since dispersed. Only now did he know that this was a rumor that Zhang Yan had intentionally spread. Zhang Yan said, "Elder Lu, you don't have to thank me. This is also the perfected sect master's intention." As they spoke, a bell rang from outside. Then, a boy holding a golden talisman entered. He first bowed to Qi Yuntian, Zhang Yan, and Hu Xian. Then, he said, "Three hall masters, the sect master has a message. Perfected Lu, please enter the hall to meet us." Qi Yuntian said, "Since the perfected sect master has summoned you, Elder Lu will do as you please." LV Junyang bowed and followed the boy out of the hall. Qi Yuntian said, "Once Li Fu is defeated, the 4 demon marquises will no longer interfere in the matters of the North Underworld continent. After the disciples of the sect occupy Kang, there is no need for them to head north. They can search for treasures on the spot. If the demon cultivator tribes are willing to listen to me, there is no need to kill them all." Hu Xian said, "A few days ago, Yan Buxiao sent a letter saying that he wants to help the 10 demon tribes establish a country. In the future, they can pay tribute. There is no need for the disciples of the sect to run around and work hard. I personally think that it is feasible, but I don't know what the 2 hall masters think." Qi Yuntian thought for a while and said, "What does junior brother Zhang think?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "It is feasible. Establishing more than 10 demon countries in one go was very likely to change the current situation of the North Underworld continent. Whether it was good or bad, they had to try it to know. If it was 1,000 years ago, they might need to think more, but at the moment, there would be a catastrophe in at most a few hundred years. No matter what they did, it would not affect the overall situation. If they could collect more tributes, it was naturally a good thing." Qi Yuntian said, "Junior brother Hua, you can let Yan Buxiao handle this matter in the name of the 3 halls, but if there is trouble in the future, the sect will hold him responsible." Hu Xian immediately agreed. At this moment, above the South Sea, Tao Zhenhong and the others were still attacking the Fengling Ocean. It had been a whole day since they first started. The 3 of them relied on the illusory fog that was spat out by the clam worms to firmly hold the initiative. However, although it looked powerful, they had never really broken the formation of the Fengling Ocean. This was also because the 3 of them aimed to distract the attention of Yu Xiao and did not really exert their strength. Zhou Ruiying turned his wrist and released dozens of strong thunders that hit the sky. In the shaking sound, a dragon snake that was thousands of feet long exploded. However, not a single drop of blood flowed out. It only turned into fog and floated away. After seeing it, her face darkened and she gritted her teeth, another illusion. The entire Fengling Ocean was shrouded in a thick illusory fog. There were countless snakes, pythons, and spiritual birds that pounced down from time to time. However, although most of them were illusions of spiritual opportunity, she had to resist. Who knew if there was a real killer move hidden in it? The most hateful thing was that the people who came to attack the formation were still hiding behind the fog and refused to show up. Hence, they could only react accordingly. Wu Yunbi could not think of a better way to break the illusion. Although there were talismans in the Yuxiao school that could break the illusion, just now, they realized that it was not very useful. The illusion shrouded the entire Fengling Ocean. Just now, a corner of it was broken. After a while, it would regenerate, and it would consume a lot of mana. On the opposite side, Tao Zhenren stood on the altar and looked at the direction of the Fengling Ocean. Until now, he had not taken any action. Firstly, he had other arrangements to make. Secondly, after this battle, Mi and Li still had to meditate and recover their qi. If he was unlucky, he might be the only one to maintain the formation for a period of time. Hence, he needed to preserve some of his strength. The sky brightened. He turned his gaze and saw a letter flying towards him. He opened the formation door and let it in. He caught it in his hand and saw that it was a letter from Zhang Yan, informing him that the matter of the North Underworld continent had been settled. The matter of the South Sea could be decided by the 3 of them. He thought about it carefully. At this point, he had already accomplished what Yu Tsang had instructed him to do. Logically speaking, he should be able to withdraw. However, before he launched the attack this time, he did not expect that with the help of the Mirage Worm, it could actually achieve such a miraculous effect. But if he were to come again next time, it might not be the same. With the foundation of Yuxiao School, it was not difficult to find a countermeasure. Moreover, for this battle, he had really put in a lot of effort. It would be a pity not to use some killer moves, so he wanted to go all the way. However, this matter could not be decided by him alone. Hence, he transmitted his voice to Mi and Li, telling them what he was thinking. After this, Yu Xiao must be able to find an external object to restrain the mirage. This opportunity is also rare. I want to attack with all my strength. What do you two think? Li Xiaomi laughed and said in the cloud, since fellow Daoist Tao said so, I am willing to accompany you to the end. I'm willing to accompany you to the end. What does Jinren Mi say? Mi Jinren snorted and said, you should have done this long ago. Tao Jinren said, if that's the case, then please hold it back for another half a day, so that I can condense the blade qi a little more. Li Xiaomi said, okay, just now, we haven't really used up much mana, but the mirage worm is a little weak. Fortunately, there are still elixir jades to eat, so it should be fine for another day or two. Tao Jinren's heart sank. After a while, strands of formation qi floated in the sky. Above the formation, where the clouds and mist covered, there was a blade qi that was 7 to 8 miles long. The spiritual light inside was moving back and forth. It seemed like it wanted to vent, but there were layers of qi activity covering it, so it could not. The formation qi below all gathered into it. This was a divine ability that he learned from the Immortal Mansion's secret book. It was called Tai Circumference Yang Splitting Blade Qi. This was a method to break formations and cut the land. Although it was extremely powerful, it needed to use the formation plate to circulate the blade qi. Apart from that, it also needed more than 30,000 kinds of external medicine, and there was no lack of rare items. When Clear Feather's sect was on the East Sea, they couldn't collect so many spiritual medicines. This time, he refined it at all costs to coordinate with the Battle of North Underworld and not be disturbed by Yu Xiao. But even if all the above conditions were met, he cultivated for more than a day and just now condensed this blade qi. Originally, he was prepared to help when he couldn't handle it, but the battle was progressing more smoothly than expected, so he was prepared to slash it out. 4 hours passed quickly, and the blade qi was already more than 10 miles wide. Tao Jinren felt that he was close to his limit and couldn't expand anymore, so he didn't force it and decisively stopped. He transmitted his voice to the sky, fellow Li, after the blade momentum is released, I can't control it either. Because of various reasons, I haven't tried it elsewhere. I only know from the secret book that the power of this blade qi is peerless. You must stay far away. Li Xiaomi didn't dare to belittle it and said solemnly, thank you for reminding me, fellow Tao. He turned around and escaped far away. Under the sea, the mirage worm seemed to have sensed some danger, and with just a little urging, it swam out at an extremely fast speed. As the mirage worm retreated, the blade qi in the air gradually dispersed. But Zhou and Wu had been on guard in the illusion for a whole day and night, so they really couldn't distinguish whether what they saw was an illusion or not, so they just firmly held the big formation and didn't make any extra movements. Tao Jinren focused his mind and guided the blade qi according to the spell. It slowly flew to the sky and stopped above the high cloud just now. At this time, there was a rumbling sound in the sky, and the blade qi was already leaning forward, slowly moving towards the direction of the Fengling Ocean. At this time, his gaze was fixed in front, and he pointed in that direction. At this moment, the flow of qi around him seemed to have stopped for a moment, and after the blade qi was slightly delayed, it slashed down from the sky with a rumble. In an instant, Li Xiaomi seemed to have sensed a great danger and hurriedly hid far away. Mi Jinren looked at the blade qi that cut through the sky, and there was a trace of surprise in his eyes. Zhou and Wu immediately felt that something was wrong, and they suddenly raised their heads and looked towards the sky. Wu Yunbi's expression suddenly changed, and he took out the 3-return chaotic cloud flag, wanting to sacrifice it to the sky to resist. However, when the flag reached the outside, it turned into a boy. He took a look, and his face also showed a trace of horror, and he said in a low voice, Jinren Wu, it's not that I don't want to help, but I really can't block this blade qi. Zhou Ruiying found it hard to believe, and she said, Senior Marshal Brother Wu, is it an illusion? Wu Yunbi calmed himself down, and he shook his head. No, this blade qi is far away from the Fengling Ocean, and it can't be faked. At most, in another 11 or 12 breaths, it will reach me. Zhou Ruiying's expression turned cold. If that was the case, even the sect could not help in time. She took a deep breath, and she said, Senior Marshal Brother Wu, what do we do after we come down? Wu Yunbi said resolutely, we can only defend with all our strength, and use the power of the formation to resist. Zhou Ruiying was angry, and she shouted at the 3 return flags' true spirit, what a useless thing. The boy felt wronged, and he said loudly, although I can't block all the blade qi, I can still protect 2 of you. Wu Yunbi shouted, Junior Marshal Sister Zhou, don't be distracted anymore, and don't care about your transcendence energy. Help me block the blade qi. Zhou Ruiying did not care about anything else, and she focused on using the divine movement technique. After a few breaths, the blade qi was getting closer to them, and it was getting faster and faster. When it was the last 100 miles, it suddenly rushed forward, and it slashed on the formation. Boom! The entire Fengling Ocean exploded with a loud sound, and the seawater on both sides surged, and the force of the collision pushed them thousands of miles away. Looking from afar, the center of the ocean had sunk deep, and 2 tall waves suddenly rose on both sides, and they continued to spread outwards. When everything calmed down, 2 clear air flew into the sky, and Zhou Ruiying and Wu Yunbi looked down. The formation under their feet was originally made up of dozens of small formations, but now, half of it had collapsed, and the land that was originally formed by force was also broken. As for the disciples on the island, there was less than 10% of them left. The power of this attack was far beyond his expectation. Wu Yunbi said in a deep voice, I didn't expect the 3 of them to have such a strange technique, and we have underestimated them. The 2 of us can't defend this place, so I have to ask the sect to send another spiritual master here, and try to suppress or drive them away, or else there will be no peace in the future. Meanwhile, on the other side, Mi Zhenren's eyes were shining, and she turned around and said, Tao Zhenren, that was a good attack. Tao Zhenren smiled, and said, this attack can earn us half a year of peace, but if Yu Xiao comes down, they will not give us the chance to attack so easily, and I'm afraid the future will be difficult. When he was young, he cultivated in the Nanhua sect, and he was well aware of the foundation of a sect like Yu Xiao school. If they really got serious, they had to be prepared for the worst. Mi Zhenren snorted, and said, what's there to be afraid of? We are here to lure them to attack, but we are afraid that they won't come. Tao Zhenren smiled, and said, that's right. But we should inform spiritual master Zhang about the situation here. He took out a talisman, and after a short while, he lightly patted it, and it flew to the sky. Half a day later, Zhang Yan received the letter in the Duzhen Hall. After reading it, he thought for a while, and summoned Jingyu, and said, I want to go into closed-door training, and hope to break through to the second layer as soon as possible. Let me handle the outside affairs. If Tao Zhenren of the Southern Sea sends a letter asking for precious materials and spiritual medicines, let him have it. If there is something that he can't decide on, he can go to the upper extreme hall to look for spiritual master Qi, I have already informed him. Jingyu said, Master, don't worry, I will handle it properly. Zhang Yan nodded, waved his sleeves, and ordered him to leave. He then sat up straight, and lightly inhaled the primordial essence stone on the stage. In a flash, a thin strand of purple gas flew out, and entered between his eyebrows. Chapter 1094. Yuxiao School, on immersed light cliff. Kangzheng Hall Master Zhou Dongpa sat on a high platform, and the person who was talking to him was Bai Hall Master Zhou Liguang. Both of them looked serious, as if they were discussing an important matter. Zhou Liguang said, in the Battle of North Darkland, Li Fu was defeated. The 4 demon tribes have retreated back to Yuanjun Palace. It looks like they can no longer stop Qinsang School from invading South Continent. Zhou Dongpa's gaze was deep, and he said, but I don't know what Qinsang School is planning by not killing Li Fu. Zhou Liguang said, this also puzzles little brother. Yesterday, I sent a letter to ask, and he said that he exchanged a treasure for his life. Only then did Lu Junyang let him go. However, when I asked further, he didn't give me any details and refused to say what it was. Zhou Dongpa smiled and said, "This item must be extremely useful to the Yutsang sect. That monkey Li Fu didn't tell us because he didn't want to tell us for free. He also had a bitter battle with Lu Junyang, so he could be considered to have contributed. As usual, we'll just send him some jade pills to make him speak." Zhou Liguang frowned. "Senior apprentice brother, why do you have to give in to them? When Qinsang's school invaded North, not only did they hide, when we asked, they were also secretive. If it wasn't for Yu Xiao's care, how could they survive until now? In my opinion, they should be taught a lesson." Zhou Dongpa said nonchalantly, "I don't need them now. As long as these 4 demons are still in the northern Dark North continent, even if they don't do anything, the Yutsang sect will have to put more effort into defense. That's enough for me." Zhou Liguang seemed to have thought of something, and his face darkened. Qinsang School set up the formation in South Sea. Their intention is the same as me attacking North Darkland. This time, it is because of them that I am unable to threaten Qinsang. Zhou Dongpa didn't care, and said, "South Sea is not like North Darkland. We are not as restrained as Qinsang. If it wasn't for the fact that I didn't want to waste my magic power, it wouldn't be difficult to get rid of them." Zhou Liguang hesitated for a moment before saying, "Hall Master Xian Ming and Peak Master Gao Ming sent me a letter yesterday. I have already read it. In the letter, they said that they failed again. He has already been defeated twice, so he begs the school to punish him. He also says that with only the 2 of them, it will be difficult to defend the Fengling Ocean, so he wants our school to send another person to guard it." Zhou Dongpa said, "There's no need to punish them. That day when the formation plate was broken, we saw it with our own eyes. Tao Zhenhong and the others must have planned this for a long time. It wasn't their fault. Even someone else would not be able to avoid such a result. As for sending more manpower..." As he spoke, he stroked his beard and fell into deep thought. In his eyes, as long as he blocked the Fengling Ocean and did not threaten the Southern Cliffs continent, it did not matter how many times the formation plate was broken. At most, he would just have to continue the confrontation. Thereupon he said, "In Xiongdi's opinion, there is no need to dispatch more people. At most, we'll give Hall Master Xian Ming and Hall Master Xian Ming a few true treasures. That should be enough." Zhou Liguang reminded him carefully, "Senior apprentice brother. That day, I saw that Tao Zhenhong and the others' blade qi was too strong, it seemed to have the ability to break the formation." Zhou Dongpa shook his head and said, "I've seen it before, no matter how the blade qi is refined, it will eventually rely on the formation qi to gather. This is not something that can be done in a day. They probably used it to respond to the Qinsang. If they can prepare in advance, it won't be difficult to break it. Tell the 2 not to make a fuss about it, just guard it well. Just share the sect's worries." As he spoke, he heard a chime coming from the top of the hall. He turned to look outside and asked, "What's the matter?" A disciple said from outside, "Hall Master, returning Sun Peak Master is here." Zhou Dongpa's expression changed slightly. He said, "Invite him in." A short while later, a Daoran man wearing a green robe and a Daoist crown stepped into the hall. It was returning Sun Peak Master Wu Ruyang. When the 2 people in the hall saw him, they immediately stood up to welcome him. Both parties bowed and sat down. Zhou Dongpa smiled, "Sage Wu, you came at the right time. Just now, both of us were talking about how to deal with the South Sea situation. Sage is here, we can come up with a plan together." Wu Ruyang said in a deep voice, "I'm also here for this matter." Zhou Dongpa was slightly surprised. He said, "Then what does Sage think?" Wu Ruyang said, "I think that since Tao Zhenhong and the others broke the Fengling Ocean formation plate one after another, they have endless tricks up their sleeves. If they stay there and let them slowly grow stronger, it will be difficult to control in the future. It will be disadvantageous to our Yu Xiao. We must think of a way to get rid of them as soon as possible. Even if they come back later, it will be exchanged for decades of peace." Zhou Dongpa did not say anything. Seeing this, Zhou Liguang said, "But Sage Wu, the formation that the 3 of them built has already taken shape. It will not be easy to break. I heard that the Qinsang school is now searching for treasures everywhere, even going as far as to attack the North Dark Continent, and also ordered the small sects to pay double the tribute. It is obvious that they are gradually unable to hold on. If we can continue like this, in 100 or 200 years, we can wear them down. Wouldn't it be easy to get rid of them then? Wu Ruyang waved his hand, said, what the outside world sees, it may not be true, it can only be trusted. 5 points, there is a high possibility that the Qinsang school is using a smokescreen. Even if that is not the case, the spiritual materials in the North Dark Continent are not as good as the Middle Pillar and Southern Cliff continents. It is barely enough to maintain the sect's needs. We really cannot count on this. Zhou Dongpa thought for a moment, nodded and said, what Sage said makes sense. It is just that in order to avoid the disaster, all the Zhenren in the sect are working hard. It is not good to use mana. Wu Ruyang said, this is not without a solution. Both of you know, my remaining lifespan is only 100 or 200 years. I do not seek to ascend. Improving my cultivation is already useless to me. I am willing to go to the sea to get rid of this hidden danger. Zhou Dongpa was moved. Sage Wu, why do you have to be like this? There are many things in the world that can prolong life. Yu Xiao cannot do without sage. Wu Ruyang shook his head. Even if you prolong your life, if you do not cultivate in a place like the spiritual eye where the spiritual vigor is pure and pure, your vitality and qi will definitely decline every day. When the disaster begins, how much combat power will you have left? At this point, his expression turned serious. Both of you, I am willing to use this treasure to break the formation on the sea, and guard the sea for the sect for 100 years, to prevent the sect from being invaded, but I also ask the sect to agree to one thing. The two of them looked at each other. Zhou Dongpa was the first to speak. Sage Wu, please speak clearly. Wu Ruyang said solemnly, after I die, Wu Fenggu can take over my position as peak leader. I hope that the sect will support him. Of course, if he is not capable and cannot break through the barrier, then this matter will be dropped. There is no need to mention it again. Zhou Dongpa sighed. This is a big matter. It is not my place to make the decision. I can only report it to Sage. Only then can I reply to Sage Wu. Wu Ruyang nodded. All right, I will wait for the two Shixiang's reply. It was presumptuous of me to come today. I will not disturb the two of you. I will take my leave first. After saying this, he stood up and bowed. After saying, wait a moment, he turned around and walked out. The two of them stood up and watched him walk out of the hall. Zhou Liguang looked over and said, Shixiang, about this matter, you, Zhou Dongpa said, there is no need to say more. Sage has his own judgment on this matter. We do not need to act on our own. A few days later, Yuxiao School's returning Sun Peak leader Wu Ruyang personally went to Fengling Ocean to plan for the next 3 months. He ordered Zhou Ruying and Wu Yunbi to coordinate with him, using Butian Pavilion's formation-breaking treasure, Ocean Calming Peak, to attack for half a month, finally destroying the formation plate on the ocean. Tao Zhenhong and the other two used the Dragon Palace to escape, returning back to the Eastern Sea, entering a small world to cultivate, hoping to recover their lost mana as soon as possible. After Wu Ruyang and the other two retreated, he stopped at Fengling Ocean. It took him less than half a year to dispatch the disciples of the clan to build another formation plate. He then set up another formation, after which Zhou and Wu Yunbi returned to the mountain gate. While he stayed here alone, it seemed like he would not leave anytime soon. Everything that happened here quickly spread to the Qinsang school, but Zhang Yan was still in closed-door training. Qi Yuntian and Huoxian both felt that it was not suitable for them to move in the next few decades. After ordering people to send some pill jade to the Eastern Sea, they temporarily did not pay attention to the Southern Sea. At this moment, in the northern underworld, the tribes of the South Continent had already been pacified. The 4 demon marquises sealed their palaces and did not come out. For a moment, the north and the south were calm and stable. In the mountains, time flew, and in the blink of an eye, another 40 years had passed. In the Duzhen Hall, Zhang Yan's eyes slowly opened. There seemed to be a flash of purple in his clear eyes. He put down the acupoint essence stone that had become extremely gray in his hand. At this moment, among the 4 essence stones on the table, 3 of them had already become dim. Only the one that had not been taken out of the clear purple spiritual qi still maintained its original appearance. Since his closed-door training, his mana had been constantly increasing. It could be said that the longer he used, the stronger his accumulation. However, until today, there was no change. Like a deep pool that had been stored to the extreme, the mana could no longer be increased, it could no longer be filled. No matter how much spiritual opportunity was refined, it would only dissipate between heaven and earth, it could no longer be increased. At this moment, he could already feel that outside of his own body, there seemed to be an invisible barrier, blocking the way up. Only by breaking it, could he truly be free. He was very clear that as long as he broke this barrier, he could truly enter the second stage of the elephant realm. Actually, it was not too difficult for a person to cultivate to this stage. He only needed to accumulate enough mana, then he could pass this stage. After reaching the second stage, it was equivalent to the restriction between heaven and earth. Be it the breathing of spiritual opportunity or the recovery of essence, it would be greatly greater than the first stage. There were many names for this stage in the Taoist book, such as dust dusting, veil passing, clear mind, void curtain, and so on. However, this stage was easy to pass, but if one continued, he would need to go through several barriers to enter the third stage, and each barrier would be more difficult than the one before, and each barrier would be stronger than the one before. The stronger the foundation of the person, the more barriers he would have to go through. It could be 6 barriers, 9 barriers, or even more than 9 barriers, it all depended on the foundation of the cultivator. At this moment, Zhang Yan already had one foot on the door. It looked like he only needed to take a gentle step forward to reach the opposite stage, but he was not in a hurry to go over. Instead, he picked up an erosion inscription jade slip and repeatedly looked at it. Recorded on the slip was a secret technique passed down by the great underworld founding ancestor. It allowed the cultivators of the heavenly abode in the sect to borrow the assistance of medicinal pills and circulate the profound technique at the same time after they entered the second level. Then, they would be able to break through the second to fourth level of the heavenly abode. It was recorded that the third-generation sect master, Yuan Zhongzi, had once broken through the fourth barrier, and since then, the successive generations of caves in the Qinsang school, including the later ascended spiritual masters, all stopped above the third barrier, and no one could compare to him. After Zhang Yan saw the secret technique, he understood it clearly. If he was able to charge through even more barriers when breaking through to the second level, then his path to the third level would surely be much smoother, and at least he would be able to save even more time of hard work. He shook his sleeves, stood up, and bowed to the sky, saying, "Disciple asks Patriarch to bestow the method." Not long after, a yellow light flew over from the sky. Upon closer inspection, it was a silk scroll. He raised his hands and took it, then slowly opened it, but when he glanced at it, the scroll was actually blank. There was no surprise in his expression. He circulated his qi, and a line of words slowly appeared on it. This was the barrier-breaking pill passed down by the great underworld patriarch, but it also varied from person to person, because cultivators had different understandings, different foundations, different cultivation, different foundations, and even different lifespans, so the external medicine used was also different. The pill that appeared at this time could only be used by him. If it was given to others, it would definitely not be suitable. He looked at it carefully, raised his eyebrows, and said, "This method can only be used by my Qinsang school." Many of the elixirs recorded in the pill formula could no longer be found in the 9 continents, but there were still some in the small worlds. However, there were not many of them. Currently, only the 3 hall masters like him could take them out and use them. He called the formation spirit over, pointed at the spiritual medicine, and said, "Gather them all, I need to open the furnace to refine the pill later." The formation spirit had been used by the previous hall master Du Zhen, so it was obviously not the first time she was searching for spiritual medicine. She said, "Master, please wait for a moment, I will be back soon." Only 2 hours later, the formation spirit returned. She curtsied and said, "This servant did as Master said and obtained all the spirit medicines recorded on the pill recipe. However, there aren't many spirit materials, so I can only refine it 4 to 5 times." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's enough." The formation spirit said, "Master, do you want me to open the pill furnace now?" Zhang Yan nodded, and said, "Open the furnace." He waved his sleeve, passed through the array door, and stepped into the pill room. Then, he sat down, and used his mana to seal the place. Due to the fact that refining this pill required a certain amount of power, only he himself knew exactly what kind of power was required. Thus, he had to personally refine it. It was the same for the previous generations of Daoist Dongtian in the Duzhen Hall. Fortunately, the formation spirit could help in refining the pill, so those who did not know alchemy only needed to know how to control the fire. Zhang Yan was Zhou Chengju's disciple, and although he did not dare to say that he was proficient in alchemy, he was far better than many of his peers in this path, so this time was very smooth. In less than half a month, he had refined 3 pills, but there was only one chance to break the barrier, so 2 more pills were actually useless. He took 1 pill and put it in his sleeve, stepped through the array door, and returned to the hall to sit down, then picked up the jade scroll on the table. The barrier-breaking technique was just an eroded rune, and although he had high attainments in this path, after some deduction, there were a few parts that he could not make a decision on. If he walked in different directions, it would definitely lead to different results. Which was better, which was worse, on the surface, it was impossible to judge. Once he took that step, he would be walking on the wrong path, and there would be no turning back. He pondered for a while, then used his mana to guide the pill into his Dharma body, but he did not refine it immediately. Instead, he held the remnant jade in his hand, sank his mind into it, and slowly deduced. Chapter 1095. 3 years later, Zhang Yan's mind finally came out from the broken jade. After he repeatedly deduced it, he'd chosen a path towards the Tao that allowed him to go the furthest from the profound technique. However, at the same time, he realized that this technique seemed to have its limits. After reaching a certain barrier, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't go any further. After confirming that his choice was the best, he didn't insist anymore. He used a few days to adjust his breathing. When he woke up from his meditation, he saw that everything was ready, so he came out of the hall and flew out. He turned into a clear light and arrived above the Xian Sea. He shouted and released his Dharma. With a loud bang, a stream of chaos Xian Qi went up high. It was endless and heavy, spreading out in the sky. He stood in the surging Xian Qi sea and closed his eyes to adjust his qi. Then, he sat down cross-legged. As he released his consciousness, a thunderous sound came from the innate Xian Qi. After a while, there was a huge tremor in the sky above the small world, and the echoes rumbled continuously. Zhang Yan could clearly feel that something outside his Dharma body seemed to have broken. At the same time, the spiritual vigor around him became clearer and more comfortable. With a gentle pull, he could absorb it into his body, and with a thought, he could turn it into essence Qi and Dharma power. At this moment, he had easily crossed the first barrier, which meant that from now on, he was a cultivator at the second stage of the elephant realm. However, he didn't stop here. With his spirit, he started to circulate the technique that he had deduced countless times. In an instant, the Dharma power climbed up layer by layer and kept growing. However, after 10 breaths, the momentum suddenly stopped, as if the top had touched the top of the sky. It was difficult to expand anymore. He knew that he had reached the second barrier. However, this couldn't stop him. With just a little force, it collapsed. Then, the torrential Dharma power surged in and rushed to the next barrier. After deducing hundreds and thousands of times in the broken jade, he was already familiar with the technique. Along the way, he was like a hot knife through butter. With an unstoppable momentum, he continuously broke through the obstacles in front of him. The 3rd level. The 4th level. The 5th level. Right now, if there was an outsider here, one could see that above his Dharma, there were streaks of lightning moving within the nether chi, and the sound of it was unceasing. Zhang Yan relied on his own incomparably solid accumulation and actually broke through 5 levels of barriers in one go. After reaching this step, his eyes flickered slightly. Previously, when he was testing in the broken jade, he couldn't pass this level. He had read the ancient records beforehand and understood that among the many barriers, this was the only place that had its own name. It was called the Heavenly Pass. He could also sense that this layer was far more solid than the previous 5 barriers. The restraints on one's body became even tighter. It was as if one's limbs were curled up in a mother's womb, unable to stretch out at all. If one tried to force their way out and made the slightest mistake, not only would it be possible for one's body to be harmed, there would also be a possibility that the barrier they broke through earlier would be mended again. With his current achievements. In reality, he had already surpassed the 3rd-generation headmaster, Yuan Zhongzi, and was the one and only in the Qinsang school. Logically speaking, he could already stop. However, there was no sign of retreat in his eyes. On the path of cultivation, one should advance bravely without retreating even half a step. How would one know what the road ahead of them would be like if they hadn't truly taken a step forward? Inside the broken jade. After hundreds and thousands of repeated trials, what he sought was to be stronger than the previous one and to continuously make breakthroughs on his previous foundation. Now that he had another chance, how could he stop and move forward? My previous path. I will never reach the peak. As soon as this thought appeared, his spiritual will and chi activity suddenly merged. The indomitable will in his heart and the belief to pursue the great way leaped out. He suddenly gathered all his spiritual power into one and smashed it against the 6th barrier. Boom! At that moment, the entire small world seemed to be shaking and the sound was getting louder and louder. In the end, it was as if the mountains were roaring and the mountains were collapsing. The Great Hall of Duzhen, be it the side halls or the main hall, was shaking gently. Even Luo Qingyu, Zhuang Bufan, and the other elders who were cultivating in the small world were alarmed. They flew out and looked at the sky in shock. A spiritual light flashed and the formation spirit flew out of the main hall. She looked at the sky and hurriedly shouted, "Guards, quickly stabilize the formation and stabilize the small world." In the Xuanzi Sea world, following her shout, jade pillars that were hundreds of feet tall rose from the bottom of the sea. Beside each pillar, there were 300-foot-tall puppets that pulled the chains and stabilized the pillars. At the same time, the restrictive formations in the small world were also activated and the surging power that was slowly dissipated. After a long time, the surging spiritual vigor finally calmed down. One could see that the chaotic world Xian Qi in the sky had merged with the surrounding sky. It seemed to have an end, but it was also boundless. It seemed to have gone beyond the sky, but it also seemed to be here. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and slowly stood up. He stretched out his hand and gently waved it in front of him as if he was wiping away an obstacle. Without a sound, the 6th barrier had already collapsed in front of him. He raised his head and looked at the sky. Although he was in the small world, he could see the mountains and rivers of the 9 continents. When his mind changed, the scenery also changed. He was no longer looking, but he was communicating with the heaven and earth. He was even deeply immersed in it and there was no distinction between them. Looking at things was equivalent to looking at himself, and looking at the world was equivalent to looking at his heart. This was no longer a divine ability that a cultivator of the 2nd stage realm should have. The 6th barrier was extraordinary. According to common sense, when one reached this stage, he only needed to borrow the seed of heaven and earth to nurture the nascent embryo and he could immediately reach the 3rd stage of the elephant realm. This was caused by his tyrannical magic power and the foundation that his peers couldn't reach. Especially since he cultivated both chi and strength at the same time, which was unique in this world. In addition, he had a firm and unwavering Tao will, which led to this result just now. He used the opportunity to break through to the 2nd stage to reach this realm. Going back 10,000 years in Qinsang school, if one didn't count the unfathomable great underworld ancestor, his achievements were so high that he had far surpassed his predecessors and no one could compare to him. A bright light flashed and the formation spirit jumped up. She bowed and said, "Congratulations, old master, congratulations, old master. Old master's breakthrough was really powerful, but I wonder which barrier did you go to? Old master, please don't blame me for asking too much. This is the rule of Duzhen Hall. When the hall master or elders reach this realm, they will record it down to encourage and warn the younger disciples." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "6th stage. The formation spirit covered her mouth with her sleeves. He cried out in shock, as though he couldn't believe it. Following that, he lowered his head deeply and curtsied, saying, "Old Master is indeed the first person since the founding of my Tsangwu sect. I wonder if Old Master has the intention to enter the third stage realm in one go." Zhang Yanhuang glanced at the surroundings and shook her head. Once the embryo was formed, there was no way for his magic power to improve anymore. All that was left was to refine his body and prepare for that last step. On the other hand, there was a huge difference between breaking through the 6th barrier and breaking through the 9th barrier to achieve the 3rd barrier. In other words, the 2nd stage was the only stage where a cultivator could increase his magic power before entering the mortal metamorphosis. Before that, the more barriers he could break through. The more power he accumulated, the higher the chances of him breaking through the realm and ascending. Just now, after breaking through the 6th stage, he already knew that there were more barriers waiting for him in front. Although he didn't know how many there were, he was still far from reaching the end. No matter what, if his foundation wasn't solid and he only pursued realms, it was impossible to cultivate to the mortal metamorphosis realm. He was a person who pursued the Tao wholeheartedly, so how would he do such an unwise thing? Moreover, if he was only satisfied with what he had now. If he stopped here, then everything he had accumulated since opening his meridians would be wasted. It was the same as using that great material to support the heavens to be the beam in the hall. He definitely wouldn't not do that. The formation spirit said, "Old Master's actions are reasonable. Only with a solid foundation can one rise to the 9th stage." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Although he wasn't prepared to ascend to the 3rd stage immediately, he still had something else to do. And that was to open up his own cave. At this moment, he suddenly had a thought. He looked at the formation spirit who was still standing in front of him and asked, "Are there any ancient books in the hall that you haven't taken out?" The formation spirit bowed and said, "All the ancient books in the hall. I don't dare to hide anything from Old Master. However, there is a letter here. It was left by the 3rd generation sect leader. He once said that among the younger generation disciples, if anyone can break through the 5th stage, they can take it for a look." Zhang Yan's heart moved. He stretched out his hand and said, "Let me take a look." The formation spirit waved her hand and the door opened. A jade scroll flew down from the sky. She lowered her head and held it up properly. She sent it to Zhang Yan and said, "Old Master, please take a look." Zhang Yan took it over and probed it with his spirit. He found that other than the first few sentences of the 3rd generation sect leader encouraging the younger generation, what followed was the various experiences when he opened up the cave. Although he had seen such words before, it wasn't as detailed as this jade scroll. Every step, every experience, and even the comprehension were clearly written down. This letter was incomparably precious. Those who paid attention could deduce the 3rd generation sect leader's cultivation level and mana from it. Although he wanted to take a look, he didn't do it out of respect for the predecessors. After looking for a while, he saw that there were still many important parts in the letter that needed to be slowly comprehended. He prepared to return to the hall to take a closer look. Thus, he turned into a ray of light and returned to the hall. The formation spirit waved her hand, and the jade pillars in the sea descended one by one. Several elders in the hall looked down and guessed that Hall Master Zhang Yan had entered the 2nd stage. Thus, they discussed the matter of sending gifts and congratulations. As for now, they didn't dare to disturb him. After Zhang Yan landed in the main hall, he carefully studied the letter left by the 3rd generation sect leader. After reading it several times, he lightly tapped on the jade scroll and thought, "Indeed, times change. The spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth is different, and the method of opening the cave is also different." From the records of the venerable grotto heaven of the past 10,000 years in Qinsong, he could clearly see that the method used 8 or 9,000 years ago was very different from what was used today. He had predicted this before, but after reading the records of the 3rd generation sect leader, he understood it even more clearly. Nearly 10,000 years ago, most of the people in the grotto heaven were disciples of mighty figures, and many of them were survivors of 100 tribulations. Because of the sky demons and sky demons, there were many heaven and earth mutants, poisonous insects, and devils in the 3 continents of Donghua. Those who were slightly weaker would find it difficult to survive. It could be said that those who could stand firm were all-powerful. The cave opened by the people in the Grotto Heaven was called the Spirit Splendor Cave, but the cave opened by the cultivators today was called the Inner Truth Cave. In fact, the two were 2 things that combined into one, just like the different names of a tree after it had matured and when it was a seedling. The Spirit Splendor Cave was a place where the cultivators used their own spiritual power to open up a realm in this world, and then introduce spiritual opportunity to form a cave. The Inner Truth Cave could only be used by the heaven and earth, and temporarily borrow a place. If the 9 continents were to be compared to a canal, and the spiritual vigor was to be compared to the surging river, then what the sages did was to divert the water from the lake and make it grow stronger. As long as the lake water accumulated far enough, even if the river water was cut off one day, as long as they were separated from each other, they would still be able to survive. What the later generations did was to throw an object filled with water into the river, and let it drift with the current. Not only would they not be able to control it, once the water dried up, they would also be affected. The reason for this was that as the spiritual opportunity of the heaven and earth gradually declined, there were fewer mystical objects like the clear purple spiritual opportunity, and there were more and more cultivators in the world. As a result, most of the younger generations could not be compared to these ancestors in all aspects. However, the later generations were not without wisdom. The Inner Truth Cave did not seem like much at first, but through continuous sacrificial refinement, or through generations of disciples, and after enough hard work, they could finally reach the state of the Spirit Splendor Cave. Compared to the former, although they could not match up to the former, they were more skillful. Zhang Yan secretly thought that the Inner Truth Cave was the normal state. If everyone opened the Spirit Splendor Cave, the spiritual opportunity of the heaven and earth would have been cut off long ago. However, with the ability of the cultivators today, if they wanted to, it was not impossible to achieve the level of the predecessors, but they would have to sacrifice their own lives as the price, so it was not worth it for them to do so. Others could not do it, but it did not mean that he could not do it. He had achieved the utmost technique, and his mana was the best among his peers, so he was not afraid that he would not be able to continue when he opened the cave. The reason why he had to do so was because opening the cave was to create an inner world, and as his cultivation grew, he could use it to get rid of this world. Therefore, the cave that the cultivators built was not only a place to hide, but it was also something that the cultivators of the Qi Dao relied on to cross the world and ascend. Those who had the intention to ascend would think of ways to create the Spirit Splendor Cave. Of course, there were almighty cultivators who took different paths and did not need this item, but they were few and far between. Zhang Yan looked down and looked at the last origin essence stone. This strand of purple clear spiritual opportunity was originally reserved for other uses, but now it seemed that he had to use it here. However, even if he did not have this item, he was confident that he could do it. Now that he had this, it was the icing on the cake, so that he would not have to work hard in the future. One must know that the calamity was coming, and there was not much time left, so the earlier he increased his strength, the better. After cultivating in the Hall of Crossing Truth for half a month, he felt that his cultivation was already stable, so he did not delay any longer and decided to open the cave. However, this Xuanzi ocean world was also opened by the predecessors, so he could not do anything here, and had to go above the 9 continents. After thinking about it, he felt that the Hall of Green Sky was the most suitable. Not to mention that there was no one there to disturb him, there was also the protection of the formation, so if there were any changes, it would be immediately detected. So he called the formation spirit over, and after giving it a few instructions, he left with a clear light. There was only a streak of sword rainbow, shining like lightning, and it flew into the sky. Chapter 1096. Zhang Yan flew into the sky and quickly arrived outside the Azure Sky Hall. With a thought, the array door opened and he stepped into the inner room. Whoosh! As soon as they landed, many spiritual birds descended from the sky and turned into beautiful women in colorful clothes. All of them knelt on the ground, and one of them with crescent-shaped eyebrows said, "We greet the palace master and wish the palace master a long life." Zhang Yan looked around. The scene in the Azure Sky Hall was very different from the last time he left. But it was full of life and was thriving. He knew that these demon servants took care of the temple every day and looked after the plants. In addition, there was the heaven and earth fetus spitting spiritual vigor here. That was why it was like this. He asked the woman, "What is your name?" The woman lowered her head and said, "I was enlightened by Jinren Han in the past and was able to transform. Now, I am temporarily a steward. The sisters below me call me Miss Su. But without the permission of the hall master, I dare not give myself a name." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Now that you have returned, the atmosphere here has changed. You have done a good job as a steward. How about I give you a name, Su Su?" Miss Su was pleasantly surprised. She knelt down and said, "Thank you, master, for giving me a name." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Bring everyone and leave. I am here to cultivate. If you see any movement later, don't be surprised. Just guard the hall's restrictive array." Miss Su bowed deeply and said yes. Then, she left with the group of servants. Zhang Yan came to the highest pavilion and stood there quietly. He looked down and not only could he see the mountains and continents, he could also see all the spiritual vigor veins on the 9 continents. The 3 western continents were very dim in his eyes. Donglai continent was isolated beyond the sea. It was hard to notice. Compared to the 2, Dongxing continent was much better. Like a candle in a room, the surroundings were bathed in its light. In this realm, only the 4 continents of Donghua were overflowing with spiritual light and auspicious air. Little by little, the sunken vortexes invaded the spiritual vigor there, knowing that every spot was where the Taoist Dongtian was. It could be seen that the momentum of this spiritual opportunity had turned from prosperity to decline. In the near future, it would definitely go downhill. Seeing this scene, he could understand what sect leader Qin had said that day. Unless there were only a few Taoist masters in the world, the spiritual vigor of the 9 continents would decline one day, and that day was not far away. However, if a battle broke out between Taoist grotto heavens, all the continents might not be safe. If they were not careful, the sect might face the danger of losing its inheritance. Going to the other world to find a place that had just begun to flourish was indeed a good choice. However, this matter had already been planned by several generations of the Qinsang school's headmaster, so he didn't need to worry too much about it until that moment arrived. Right now, all he needed to do was to increase his own cultivation as much as possible. He removed the pouch from his sleeves. He sat down on the praying mat and released his divine will. He silently sensed the changes in this world. The changes of the world were endless, and the cycle was endless. There was damage and there was replenishment, there was deficiency and there was fullness. During this period of time, there would be collapses and cracks that would appear. This was called the Xiankong cave by the cultivators. If a cultivator wanted to open up a grotto heaven, he would need to unleash his mana and use his divine will to sense the spiritual vigor to find such a place. Once there was a harvest, he would need to invade it with a trace of his divine will mana and chase after it. Then, he would slowly squeeze in more of his own chi of vitality. After a long time, it would become the seed of his own grotto heaven. According to the records, this step was called the spirit fishing pearl. As a grotto heaven seed, there was a difference in quality. If one was lucky enough to obtain such a good place, it would be easy for the cultivator to open up a grotto heaven. If one's luck was not good, he would have to put in more effort. After sensing it for a while, Zhang Yan found that it was indeed so. There was no exaggeration in the description. The mysterious void nether hole was often fleeting, and there were often no rules to follow. However, it was not easy to sense it, let alone distinguish between them. This had nothing to do with the strength of the cultivator's mana. It only depended on one's luck and whether one could grasp the real opportunity. Usually, this process would last for years or even decades. Once one found the target, one must not give up halfway. If one's luck was bad, it was possible to wait for hundreds of years. To him, waiting for a few years was nothing. However, he had a better idea now. He silently chanted in his heart, and one of his arms suddenly turned into rolling smoke. It slowly rose to a high altitude and turned into a palm. The palm lines were clear and the outline was firm. Just by looking at it, one could tell that it contained boundless power. He lifted it slightly and slammed it heavily into the void. Rumble. With the palm as the center, the sky within 100 miles was broken. Even the peak of the mountain was affected. A piece of it was missing and a clear palm mark was left. However, the strange thing was that the living beings on the peak did not feel anything strange. It was as if this place was supposed to be like this. Zhang Yan released his divine will and scanned the area. The moment the palm slammed down, he sensed several Xiankong caves appearing one after another. Though they only existed for a short moment, they did appear. He nodded and thought to himself, it seems like this method is feasible. Before he opened the grotto heaven, he had thought about it. Since Chi path cultivators could do this, could strength path cultivators do the same? After he merged the 5 transformations of strength path, his consciousness naturally gained many methods. It was as if they were imprinted in his body. One of them had the ability to collapse the void. If he cultivated it to the 6th transformations, he would be able to break through the barrier of the 2 realms with just his physical body and ascend. Though he did not have such ability, it was enough for him to cause slight changes in heaven and earth. It was enough for him to find a suitable seed in a short period of time. In the next few months, as he continued to crash into the void, he finally found a suitable place. He then infused his divine will and vitality into it. He knew that it was a crucial moment. He adjusted his breathing and started to circulate the technique. Soon, his body was surrounded by lightning and his figure became faintly discernible. He felt like he was in water. His body was sinking, but at the same time, he seemed to be floating in the air and rising. He could feel that his body was going infinitely far away and gradually breaking away from this world. If reaching the 2nd level of grotto heaven was to better harmonize with heaven and earth, then opening the grotto heaven was to get rid of this shackle so that he could finally transcend this world and go to the other side. First it was harmonization, then it was repulsion. And the path below. It was just walking along this path. At this moment, he could not help but understand. No wonder when he saw Zhui Yuming and Jinren Yuling, they seemed to be in this world, but at the same time, they were not. After a while, a thunderous sound suddenly came from the hall. He disappeared from the world without a trace. At this moment, he had already arrived at an indescribable place. At this moment, he felt a boundless force coming from all directions, as if it wanted to crush him. However, this force did not come from the outside, but from his own body. At this moment, he had already entered the inner world. According to the predecessors, once he entered this place, he should do his best to open his Dharma form. This was to protect his Dharma form. Otherwise, if he was not careful, he would be crushed and killed by his own Dharma power. In the records of the 3rd sect leader, it was warned that cultivators should not open their grotto heaven when they were weak and should try to open it when their Dharma power was full. Otherwise, it was very likely that they would be trapped in the inner world. Although he had never heard of anyone from the heavenly abode being trapped in this place, since it was mentioned in such a serious manner in the records, it would not be without reason. However, he was not afraid at all. The body of strength relied on one's own physical body. After comprehending for a moment, he let out a loud roar. Although there was not the slightest sound coming from this place, his body grew along with it. His head went up and his feet stepped down. He continued to support and expand this inner world. Only when he could no longer hold on any longer did he release his Dharma form. Roiling chaotic Xian Qi spread out in all directions, expanding the domain even further. After an unknown period of time, he felt that his Dharma power was almost exhausted. Only then did he stop. Looking over, this place was empty and empty. He knew that this grotto heaven had been opened successfully. Looking at the vast and clear spiritual energy here, it could be called the Spirit Splendor Grotto Heaven. However, he could not relax at this step. In the future, he still needed to adjust his Dharma power to stabilize the domain. Otherwise, when he returned to the place where he came from, the spiritual opportunity would be connected. After a long time, it would slowly be assimilated by the outer world of the 9 continents and would not leave any traces. Not to mention that it would be a waste of effort, he would have to start all over again. There were many methods that could be used. However, the simplest one was to use a trace of clear purple chi and suppress it with a magic treasure. This way, the spiritual opportunity would not spread out. He was already prepared for this. He closed his eyes and circulated his Dharma power for a moment. A rumbling sound came from his body and the next moment, he appeared in the green sky hall. The inner true grotto heaven could only move according to the changes of the heaven and earth. It was easy to enter one's own grotto heaven. However, once one came out, it might not be at the original place. It might be thousands of miles away. Only the physical body or spirit would be left outside. Usually, it would be placed in the mountain gate. As long as one could sense it, it could be used as a guide to return safely. However, the Spirit Splendor Grotto Heaven did not have such restrictions. Therefore, Zhang Yan could return to the original place. Once he arrived in the 9 continents, he immediately felt the spiritual opportunity pouring into his body. That was because wherever he was, the door of the grotto heaven would be there. Just now, going back and forth between the 2 places was the communication between the inner world and the outer world. He needed to constantly swallow the spiritual opportunity from the outside to nourish the newly opened grotto heaven. During this process, unless he was willing to use his Dharma power to stop, he would only stop when the grotto heaven was full of spiritual opportunity. Zhang Yan raised his hand and picked up the sleeve that he had left behind. With a thought, he returned to the grotto heaven in the blink of an eye. He took out the mountain river cloud diagram from his sleeve and threw it out. With a flash of spiritual light, it turned into a boy. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Master." Zhang Yan said with his hands behind his back, "Mountain River Child, you will guard this place from now on." Mountain River Child bowed deeply and said, "I will follow Master's orders." Zhang Yan flicked his finger and sent the origin energy stone over. He said, "This stone is also a treasure. There is a strand of purple clear spiritual opportunity in it. It can be used to control one's own spiritual opportunity. I will pass it to you now." Mountain River Child said, "I will not disappoint Master." Zhang Yan nodded his head. He slightly circulated his Dharma power and came out of the grotto heaven. He flew down the light and came to a high mountain outside the hall. He walked up the stairs and finally arrived in front of an altar. There were 14 altars here and there were strands of bright medicinal liquid. It was only 1 layer, but looking at it, it felt like it was infinitely deep. He took a few steps forward and came to the altar in the middle. He raised his hand and immediately, a ray of light rose up. After a while, sect leader Qin's figure appeared. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand and looked at him up and down. He smiled and said, "Just now, there is a lot of spiritual opportunity going to a void hole. It happened to be beside the green sky hall. I know that Hall Master Duzhen opened the grotto heaven." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "I can't hide it from sect leader Jinren. I opened the grotto heaven today. According to the sect's rules, I have to report to the sect. As the Qinsung School's Jinren grotto heaven, if he opened the grotto heaven, he must report to the sect." This was because the grotto heaven's cultivator would definitely use up a lot of Dharma power. To prevent the foundation of the grotto heaven from being damaged, the sect would send pills and precious medicine to help the cultivator recover his vitality as soon as possible. Sect leader Qin smiled and said happily, "Hall Master Duzhen's advancement is very fast. It is really the sect's fortune." At this moment, lights flashed on both sides. Shen Baishuang, Meng Zhide, Sun Zhiyan, Qian Tian, Hu Xian, and the rest appeared on the altars one by one. After everyone greeted him, they knew that he had opened the grotto heaven and had a place to protect himself. So they congratulated him. Sun Jinren smiled and said, in the past, if someone from the same generation opened a grotto heaven, he would definitely invite his friends in the world to a banquet. I wonder if Hall Master Du Zhen has this intention. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, although it is possible, there is no need to do it now. Meng Zhida said, Hall Master Du Zhen has your considerations. But since you have opened the grotto heaven, you need to have a name. This way, it will be justifiable and can be used to announce it to the world in the future. Sect leader Qin looked down and said, Hall Master Du Zhen, do you have a suitable name? Zhang Yan thought for a while, then raised his head and said, the beginning of De Yen, changes start from the beginning. I wish to have the two words De Yen. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, this is in line with Hall Master Du Zhen's name, it is very suitable. At this moment, Shen Baishuang said, but to have this name, the sect still needs to give this name. And Daoist Zhang, with Hall Master Du Zhen's honor, only sect leader Shixiang can give this name. The name of the grotto heaven was divided into titles, honorific titles, bestowment titles, and honorific titles. The titles were chosen by the sect, the bestowment titles were given by the sect masters, the honorific titles were given by the peers or disciples, and as for honorific titles, they were given by the people in the world. For thousands of years, other than the founder of a sect, no one could get it. Sect leader Qin thought for a while and said, Hall Master Du Zhen's method has reached the innate stage, the chaos is formless, and there is no trace, so you can have the two words Xianyuan. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, thank you, sect leader, for bestowing this name. The method he used to open his meridians was called Xianyuan Internal Meditation Wonderful Record, and it was from this that he really stepped onto the path of Tao. And the two words Xianyuan implied the innate stage, so it was suitable to be used here. Sun Jinren smiled and said, since you have been bestowed a title, you should have an honorific title. Daoist Zhang is the third hall master, and there is no one in your sect who has reached the true stage yet, so let us give you an honorific title. In my opinion, how about the two words Youhuan? Shen Baishuang said, Youhuan is deep and obscure, and Huan is vast, I think it is fine. Qi Yuntian and Huxian also nodded. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, thank you, Taoist masters. From today onwards, the grotto heaven he created would have a proper name, and it would be called Xianyuan Youhuan Grotto Heaven, and his disciples could also call themselves Xianyuan Grotto Heaven or Dian Grotto Heaven. Chapter 1097. Zhang Yan stayed in the Azure Palace for almost a year. He felt that the spiritual vigor in his own cave was getting more and more abundant. He knew that the inner world had been stabilized. As long as it was not involved in the rotation of the 9 continents in the future, the two would no longer be one. If he could refine it for another 100 years, he would be able to fix it and there would be no more worries in the future. He used his Xian Qi in his heart. There seemed to be a flash of lightning around his body. In an instant, he was already in the cave. This place was different from what he saw a year ago. It was no longer dark and endless void. Instead, it was a vast expanse of whiteness. The air was hazy and the clouds were faintly discernible. It was different from when he was in the 9 continents. Once he spread out his spirit, he could observe the surrounding region in an instant. He could sense that Mountain River Child had fixed his spiritual vigor in the depths of this world. It was still very far away. He looked around and there was no end to it. He shook his body and a few light clones flew in different directions. He was the one who had opened up this paradise, so he could sense that there was a boundary to it. However, these clones continued to fly for several days, yet none of them had reached the end. It was as if they could continue flying for an eternity. With a thought, all the clones that flew away appeared beside him in an instant. It was as if they were not far away. They took out a spell and returned to the body. He thought for a while and nodded his head slightly. He seemed to have understood this world. This cave could be used for cultivation. However, it was too barren. If there were friends who came, it would not be easy to entertain them. In the records, it was said that after a cultivator opened a cave, he would move some mountains, rivers, land, and exotic plants from the outside to decorate the cave. It would not be too pleasing to the eyes, and it would not be too rude to entertain guests. However, doing all these would consume the spiritual vigor of this place. Usually, the maintenance of the cave would use up more magical power. Therefore, most cultivators would choose a place. The circumference was at most a few hundred miles. After a little construction, they would stop. Zhang Yan had been to many cultivators' caves. The specific situation was the same. As for his own, he was not prepared to make a big fuss. With the painting of mountains and rivers guarding this place, although this treasure was not a killing treasure, it could display the mountains, rivers, deserts, and snowy plains. It could be said that the rivers, mountains, and rivers were all in the painting. Even if it was just an illusion, it was very suitable for this place. He transferred his thoughts to the mountain-river diagram, and the latter immediately sensed it. With a flash of brilliance, the boy appeared and bowed, "Greetings, master." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "The spiritual opportunity here has been settled." "You did well." Shan He Tongzi replied, "It's all thanks to master." He hesitated for a while and said, "Master, do you intend to build a landscape here?" Zhang Yan replied, "Why do you ask?" Mountain River Child said, "When this lowly one followed the first master. I once heard that for the cultivators of the grotto heaven to build a landscape, it is a bad idea to transplant it from the outside. That would cause the chi in the inner world to be impure, and they would have to use mana to refine the chi from time to time. It is the most troublesome. To avoid this, it is better to take some turbid spiritual opportunity inside. Over time, it will naturally rise and fall, dividing the heaven and earth. When the water and the earth are born and the 5 elements circulate, it can truly become an inner world." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "It makes sense." Turbid spiritual opportunity could also be used by the cultivators of the mysterious sect. This matter shouldn't be a secret. The reason why so few people did it was because they were afraid that a devil would be born in their own abode. It was obviously not worth it to take such a risk just to enjoy a few scenery spots. However, others were afraid. He was not afraid. With the 9 sucking demons slip in his hand, he could even suppress the sky demon, not to mention the ordinary demons. There was also turbid spiritual opportunity in the small demon cave, but that spiritual opportunity might not be enough for his grotto heaven. Perhaps only the demon cave of the 6 demon sects could absorb it to its heart's content just now. However, this was not an urgent matter after all, so there was no need to take it to heart. He could put it aside for now and see if there was a chance in the future. He gave a few more reminders and circulated his energy. After a while, the scenery in front of him changed, and he was back in the azure sky hall. He leaped up and turned into a ray of light, heading straight for the Donghua continent. Not long after, there was a flash of light on the Duzhen Hall of the floating heavenly palace. A clear light had already passed through the restrictive formation and went straight into the Xuanzi Sea realm. Zhang Yan went all the way back to the main hall. When he sat down, he called Jing Yu to his side and asked. All these years, he had been cultivating in seclusion and did not care about the outside world. Now that he asked, he found out that the South Sea Formation Board had been broken, and Tao Zhenhong and the others had already returned to the small world of the East Sea. There was no surprise in his expression. The setup on the South Sea was to restrain Yuxiao, and it could be destroyed at any time. However, even if the Formation Board was destroyed, as long as the people were saved, they could build it again in the future if there was a chance. As long as the 3 of them could threaten the rear of the South Sea from time to time and persevere, once the Qinsang school made a move in the future, Yuxiao could only think of a way to deal with them first, and then go north to fight with the Qinsang school. And by the time they settled the backyard, by that time, the Qinsang school would have already taken care of the North Dark Demon Court. Jing Yu said, after Daoren broke the formation, he has been guarding the Fengling Ocean for the past few decades, and mobilized the disciples to build the altar. Now, the sea here is already impregnable. I think, if this Daoren continues to arrange things like this, even if this Daoren is no longer here, if any Yuxiao Grotto Heavengenren is here, they can firmly defend this place. Wu Ruyang. Zhang Yan thought for a moment. Zhou Chengju once told him that in the Yuxiao school, other than the unfathomable master Lingya, among the Zhou clan, the two hall masters of the Lijiang and Kangzheng halls had the highest mana. And the third person who came down was this Huiyang peak master, Wu Ruyang. Among the three, the Lijiang hall master, Zhou Yugong, had the highest seniority. He had long cultivated his Yuan Qi and reached the third level of Dharma. However, he had already reincarnated hundreds of years ago. The Kangzheng hall master, Zhou Dongpa, was now the person who held the real power in the Yuxiao school. His cultivation level was unknown. As for Wu Ruyang, this person lived in seclusion. Other than when there was a major event in the sect, he rarely appeared outside. His specific cultivation level was also unknown. Zhang Yan calculated in his heart. This person had entered the Tao for more than 3,000 years. It was not difficult to see that this person had reached the end of his life. It was not possible for him to advance any further. No wonder he dared to use mana to attack the formation plate. He thought for a moment and said, "Just now, you said that he was the only one who attacked the formation." Zhou Ruying and Wu Yunbi did not make a move. Jingyu said, "Yes, this is what I heard. Whether it is true or not, I dare not say." Zhang Yan shook his head. The construction of the formation plate was unusually sturdy. Even if there was a formation-breaking treasure, it would be difficult for Wu Ruyang to break it in 10 days. There must be other reasons behind it. He might have to talk to Tao, Li, and the others face to face. 2 days later, above the eastern sea, Tao Zhenhong stood on top of a group of rocks, looking at the surging waves in the distance. Behind him stood 2 children who were carrying their instruments. 2 rays of clear light flew over from afar. They also landed on top of a rock not far away. After the light dispersed, Li Xiaomi and Mi Xiaonan walked out. Li Xiaomi bowed and said, "Fellow Taoist Tao, why did you summon us today? Could it be that Qinsang school sent an order here?" Mi Zhenren also stared closely. She was in seclusion to recover her mana. She was unwilling to come out if there was nothing, but if Qinsang school sent a book, it must be something important. Then she had to stop her cultivation. Tao Zhenhong returned the greeting and said, "It is indeed a book from Qinsang school." He looked at the 2 and said, "Sage Zhang has come out of seclusion." Li Xiaomi was startled and said, "Didn't Sage Zhang say that he was going to break through the second barrier? How did he come out so soon?" Tao Zhenren looked at the 2 and said slowly, "Sage Zhang has entered the second barrier." Li Xiaomi was shocked. He thought that Zhang Yan would need at least 100 or 200 years to reach this step. He didn't expect that he would succeed in just a few decades. He said sincerely in admiration, "Sage Zhang's ability is really beyond our imagination. It's really not something we can estimate." Mi Zhenren didn't say anything. She was also very surprised when she heard the news. It had only been a few years and he had already cultivated to the second barrier of the elephant realm. Especially since this Sage Zhang had cultivated for less than 1,000 years. It was really hard to imagine how far he could go in the future. Li Xiaomi thought for a while and said, "Since Sage Zhang has entered this barrier, we should send him a congratulatory gift." Tao Zhenren nodded and said, "Of course we should. However, Sage Zhang wants to see us recently. I think it's about the South Sea. I don't know if Taoist Li's psychic jade wall is ready." Li Xiaomi said, "These years, I have ordered the aquatic tribe to search the 4 seas and found a total of 5 useful psychic jade walls. They are now in the shell tomb at the bottom of the sea to nourish their spiritual vigor. If you need it, you can order them to bring it here now." Tao Zhenhong immediately said, "There's no time like the present. Since the 3 of us are here today, please bring it here, Taoistly, so that you can talk to Sage Zhang." Li Xiaomi agreed and sat down cross-legged. He took out a spirit shell and placed it half a foot in front of him. In just a moment, a low dragon roar came from his mouth. The spirit shell also trembled slightly and the sound spread far away. About 4 hours later, there was a crashing sound in the sea, and a demon whale rose from the sea. Its body was as big as a small city, and as it rose higher and higher, clear curtains of water flowed down its smooth back. Tao Xinren looked up and saw that the demon whale was tied up by ropes on both sides. It was connected to a 10-foot-long psychic jade wall. On top of it, there were more than 10 abnormally strong aquatic tribe trying to untie the ropes. Li Xiaomi stood up and waved his hand. The aquatic tribe did not dare to stay any longer. After a few kowtows, they all jumped down from the back of the whale and plunged into the sea. He rolled up his sleeves again and a cloud appeared. It lifted the jade wall into the sky and stood upright. Finally, it landed steadily on the reef below. After it was straightened, there was a loud bang. Tao Xinren looked at the natural patterns on the jade wall and knew that it was a high-grade one. He nodded and turned around to give an order. The two children behind him came forward and lit a stick of incense in front of the jade wall. As the smoke drifted, the jade wall also emitted rays of spiritual light. At the same time, the three of them felt the spiritual opportunity around them change and a huge amount of mana descended. As the spiritual light flashed on the jade wall, Zhang Yan's figure slowly emerged from it. His face became clearer and clearer. The big rock actually shook again as if it could not support itself anymore. The expressions of the three of them changed slightly. Fortunately, it only shook for a moment and the jade wall calmed down again. Only then did they relax and saluted together, saying, "Greetings, Sage Zhang." Zhang Yan nodded and returned the salutation, "Greetings, my three friends." In reality, although this jade annulus was better than the previous one, it still could not withstand the mana that he had placed here. However, after entering the second realm, even if it was a split light shadow, he could still freely restrain his mana and not destroy it. After chatting with the three of them for a while, Zhang Yan said, "I'm looking for the three of you because the letter did not say much about the battle in the South Sea. Therefore, I want to ask about the details." The three of them looked at each other and Tao Xinren first said, "Sage Wu is a capable person. Although he borrowed my formation board, that was not the main reason. Instead, he commanded a group of owls to bite the foundation of the formation under the sea. This made it difficult for my formation map to borrow the spiritual opportunity from the earth veins. That was why I lost to him." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "So that's how it is." He also knew about the origin of the owls. This insect was originally born in the South Cliff continent. It loved to enter the sea and gnaw on seashells. It could even go deep into the ground and climb on the spiritual opportunity of the earth veins to absorb the spiritual opportunity. Many cultivators had the mind to use this insect to deal with some restrictions and formation doors. However, the mountain guarding formation of ordinary Taoist sects had restrictions within restrictions and formations within formations. Usually, it would extend thousands of miles away from the mountain gate. This kind of insect could not even get close to it. Not to mention the big sects, even the small sects had never used this thing in battles. Although the formation board in the South Sea was as strong as the mountain guarding formation, there were still many flaws. After all, it was set up by driving the marine animals. The formation had only been set up for a few decades, but it had some meticulous work. Never would they have thought that the other party would take advantage of this flaw and use it to break through the formation door. Li Xiaomi sighed and said, "This time, we have been negligent. If we knew that he would use this kind of strange insect, how could we not take precautions?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Who can take care of this kind of thing in every aspect? If I was here, I would have also been negligent. The three of you don't have to blame yourselves. Since the formation board has been broken, we can set it up again next time." In the world, as long as one had the intention to target it, there was no part of the formation that could not be broken. All that was needed was time and necessary conditions. Moreover, the battle between the enlightened masters could easily destroy mountains and seas. Why would the three of them deliberately guard against this kind of small insect? It was normal that they did not think about this. He thought for a while and said, "The three of you have met with Xinren Wu, what do you think of his cultivation?" Li Xiaomi said, This Shinran Wu's mana is very strong, but I thought that with the three of us, it would not be difficult to fight against him. But at that time, we were worried that we would be surrounded by the rest of the enlightened masters from the Yuxiao school, so we did not really fight and escaped using the Dragon Palace. Tao Xinren said in a deep voice, "This person's cultivation is far above me, but it is hard to know how many barriers he has broken through. But he has not cultivated the seed of vitality, otherwise we may not be able to escape successfully." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly and said, "What a pity, if it was not for the situation, I would be very willing to fight with him and see how high his cultivation is." He had just reached the second realm, but he wanted to find a suitable opponent to fight with so that he could verify his cultivation. But his identity was different. If Hall Master Du Jun fought, it would be the same as Qinsang school fighting, and it was not the time for the real war between the two sections. Under normal circumstances, it would not be possible.